There's a kind of freedom most people never taste. Not the freedom to do whatever you want, whenever you want, but the inner freedom to move through life unbothered, laser-focused, and unshakably clear about what matters. It doesn't come from winning arguments, collecting applause, or proving your worth. It comes from subtraction. From walking alone when you must, from refusing to cling to what you can't control, and from pushing your boulder without asking the hill for permission. The world keeps you busy with noise, opinions, notifications, expectations. It trains you to outsource your attention, to sell your focus for cheap dopamine and borrowed beliefs. But focus is sovereignty. When you reclaim it, you stop being tossed around by the moods of the crowd. You stop living reactively. Solitude becomes a forge. When you step back from the constant pull of other people's agendas, you don't become less, you become distilled. Fewer distractions, fewer compromises, fewer excuses. What remains is direction. Of course, direction doesn't remove friction. There's always a hill. This is the truth most self-help avoids. The work is heavy and often repetitive. You push, it rolls back, you push again. But the myth of Sisyphus isn't a curse when you see it clearly. It's a revelation. Meaning appears when you choose the weight, when you give the struggle a purpose and meet it with discipline. The task doesn't shrink, you grow. In the rhythm of effort, you stop negotiating with yourself. Resistance becomes a cue to move, not a reason to quit. And then there's the quiet superpower almost no one teaches, strategic indifference. Not apathy, precision. You are finite. Your time, your attention, your emotional bandwidth, they're scarce resources. Caring about everything is the fastest route to caring well about nothing. Detachment is how you protect your focus from leaks. You stop feeding every opinion, every slight, every outcome you cannot control. You don't abandon standards, you stop worshipping outcomes. That shift turns anxiety into fuel. You get lighter, you move cleaner, you become difficult to derail. Put these ideas together and a different life emerges. Solitude sharpens your vision. Discipline turns that vision into momentum. Detachment keeps the momentum from being hijacked by noise. You no longer wait for perfect conditions, for motivation, for consensus. You build a day you can respect and repeat. You measure progress by alignment, not applause. You become the kind of person who is busy with the necessary, not the noisy. This isn't a promise of ease, it's a promise of clarity. A way of living that trades the drama of constant reaction for the quiet intensity of deliberate action. If you've felt scattered, stretched thin, pulled into 1,000 directions that aren't yours, consider this your reset. Choose fewer goals, higher standards, and a smaller circle of things worth caring about. Walk alone when you must. Push the boulder you've chosen. Stop negotiating with distractions that have never paid you back. Inner freedom is not found, it's built. One focused hour at a time, one clean decision at a time, one deliberate step, repeated, until the hill no longer feels like an enemy but a training ground for who you're becoming. Most people go to great lengths to avoid being alone. They fill their days with constant noise, music playing in the background, endless scrolling on their phones, television shows running while they fall asleep. Silence makes them restless, and solitude feels unbearable. This is not simply a modern problem, it is something deeply wired into us as human beings. For most of history, being alone meant danger. A single person separated from their tribe could starve, fall prey to animals, or be attacked by outsiders. Belonging was not just a matter of emotional comfort, it was survival. That ancient instinct still lives in us today, even though we no longer face the same risks. Our biology tells us that rejection is a threat and solitude means weakness. This is why so many chase approval, why we measure our worth in likes and followers, and why being excluded from a group feels almost unbearable. Yet what once kept us alive has now turned into a prison, preventing us from ever discovering who we truly are when the crowd is stripped away. Solitude terrifies because it removes the mirror of other people's opinions. Most of us only know ourselves through reflection, through the way others respond to us, through the roles we play in society, through the approval or disapproval that comes from those around us. When you step away from all of that, when you sit in a room with no one else to validate you, you're forced to face the raw truth of your own existence. That can be uncomfortable, even painful. Questions emerge. Who am I if no one is watching? What do I actually believe if I'm not repeating what others expect me to say? Can I bear my own company without distraction? These are questions solitude demands, and most would rather drown them out than answer them. Yet throughout history, there have always been figures who dared to walk the outsider's path, figures who embraced solitude not as punishment but as liberation. Take Diogenes, the cynic philosopher who lived in Athens during the 4th century BCE. He mocked wealth, fame, and social norms, and instead chose to live in a large ceramic jar, often described as a barrel. He had no home, no possessions of value, and no desire for status. He wandered the streets, sometimes holding a lamp in broad daylight, claiming he was searching for an honest man. His life was a rejection of the very foundation of society. To most Athenians, he was a madman. But in truth, Diogenes was freer than all of them, because he no longer needed society's approval to define him. By choosing solitude, by choosing to stand apart from the expectations of his time, he discovered a kind of radical independence that few could imagine. The samurai offer another example of this path. In feudal Japan, honor and loyalty were central to their code. To be a warrior was to serve a master, to dedicate one's life to duty. But when a samurai lost his master, whether through death, disgrace, or betrayal, he became a ronin, a warrior without a lord. To be ronin was considered shameful, a mark of dishonor. Yet some embraced this solitude as a way of living beyond rigid hierarchies. They wandered as mercenaries, philosophers, or swordsmen who lived by their own discipline rather than submission to authority. Miyamoto Musashi, perhaps the most famous swordsman in Japanese history, lived as a ronin for most of his life. He fought over 60 duels, never bound by a single master, and in his later years wrote Dokodo, The Path of Walking Alone. Musashi's philosophy revealed that true mastery comes not from obedience, but from self-discipline and independence. The samurai who could walk alone, without the safety of a clan, embodied both danger and freedom at once. Nietzsche, too, saw solitude as essential for the higher individual. He often described the philosopher as someone who must retreat to the mountains, both literally and metaphorically. In his writings, the image of the mountain appears again and again, the place of clarity, of air so thin that few can breathe it, the lonely heights where one must endure isolation in order to see farther than the crowd below. Nietzsche himself lived this truth. He spent much of his life in solitude, battling illness, estranged from his peers, wandering through Switzerland and Italy in search of health and quiet. For him, the mountain was not simply a place, it was a metaphor for what it meant to rise above common thinking. To reach the summit, you must first accept the loneliness of the climb. The herd remains in the valley, comfortable and safe, but the one who dares to rise will always walk apart. Solitude was not a curse to Nietzsche, it was the furnace in which greatness is forged. When we put these examples together, Diogenes laughing at society, Musashi sharpening his sword alone, Nietzsche breathing the cold air of the Alps, we see a pattern emerge. Solitude is not about being abandoned. It is not about rejection or exile. It is about choosing to step away, to break free from the crowd in order to cultivate inner strength. This is why solitude, though terrifying, is also transformative. It strips away the illusions of belonging and forces you to face life directly. It is important here to distinguish solitude from isolation. Isolation is what happens when solitude is forced upon you, when you are cut off from others against your will. Solitude, by contrast, is a choice. It is a conscious step into independence. The difference between the two is empowerment. The one who isolates feels powerless, but the one who chooses solitude discovers freedom. This is why the outsider's path is not meant for escape. It is meant for discovery. To walk alone is not to reject humanity entirely, but to no longer allow yourself to be enslaved by it. The practical question is how to begin. Solitude doesn't mean disappearing into the mountains forever or renouncing all possessions. It can start with something as simple as sitting quietly for an hour without a phone, without music, without distraction. It can mean going for a walk without telling anyone, letting your thoughts settle without interference. It can mean daring to hold an opinion that others might dislike, refusing to nod along when you disagree. These small acts of solitude strengthen the mind, preparing you for larger moments when you may need to stand against the crowd. In choosing solitude, you are choosing to hear your own voice above the noise of the world. The outsider's path requires courage because it is lonely at first. You may feel misunderstood, criticized, or ignored. But history shows that every great philosopher, every great warrior, every great creator has had to walk alone at some point. They endured solitude not as punishment but as preparation. They understood that belonging to themselves was more valuable than belonging to a crowd. And they discovered that once you are no longer afraid of walking alone, you can never truly be enslaved again. So solitude should not be feared, it should be embraced. It is not the end of connection but the beginning of authenticity. To walk alone is to declare, I no longer need the approval of others to live my truth. That is why solitude, though terrifying, is the ultimate freedom. It may set you apart, but it also sets you free. Diogenes was one of the most unusual and provocative figures in the history of philosophy. He lived in Athens over 2,000 years ago, during a time when wealth, status, and social order defined one's worth. While other philosophers founded schools, wrote treatises, or sought influence among politicians, Diogenes chose the life of a beggar. He rejected the comforts of society so completely that he lived inside a large clay jar in the middle of the city. He owned almost nothing, ate scraps, and wandered barefoot, carrying only a staff, a cloak, and a small bag. When he saw a boy drinking water from his hands, Diogenes immediately threw away his only cup, saying that even this was unnecessary. To most Athenians, he was outrageous, perhaps even insane, yet his way of living was deliberate. He was making a point. Freedom comes not from having more, but from needing less. One of the most famous stories about Diogenes involves his encounter with Alexander the Great, the most powerful man in the world at the time. Alexander, curious about this strange philosopher, sought him out. He found Diogenes lying in the sun, resting. Standing before him, the conqueror of the nations asked, "Is there anything I can do for you?" Diogenes looked up, squinted against the light, and replied, "Yes, stand out of my sunlight." That was all. No flattery, no request, no interest in pleasing the man who controlled empires. In that moment, Alexander may have ruled armies and kingdoms, but Diogenes showed he ruled himself. When Alexander later reflected on the meeting, he is said to have told his companions, "If I were not Alexander, I would wish to be Diogenes." This story endures because it captures the essence of freedom, to need nothing from others, even from kings. The lesson here is radical and deeply uncomfortable for most people. True freedom is not measured by how much power or wealth you can accumulate. It is measured by how little you need from others to feel complete. Diogenes demonstrated that when you stop chasing approval, possessions, and validation, you become untouchable. No one can control you with promises or threats because you have nothing to lose. This is what made him so dangerous and yet so inspiring. He mocked Athenian society by showing them that their luxuries, their politics, and their obsession with appearances were fragile illusions. They relied on them for meaning, but he did not. In his barrel, with nothing but his cloak and his wit, he was freer than the richest noble in Athens. This brings us to the contrast between approval and authenticity. Most people spend their lives chasing approval, trying to be liked, admired, and respected. They adjust their words, their clothes, even their personalities to fit in. They post curated versions of their lives online, hoping for likes and comments that act as little injections of validation. But this dependence on approval is a chain, even if it feels pleasant. The moment you need other people to constantly reassure you, you are no longer living authentically, you are performing. Approval may give temporary comfort, but it robs you of freedom. Authenticity, on the other hand, is raw, unfiltered, and sometimes uncomfortable. It may cost you popularity or praise, but it gives you back your integrity. To live authentically means to stop asking, "What will they think of me?" and start asking, "What do I truly think of myself?" Diogenes embodied authenticity in its purest form. He didn't care how absurd he looked, how offensive his words seemed, or how much people mocked him. He barked at passers-by, urinated in public, and ridiculed philosophers who preached virtue while living in luxury. Everything he did was meant to strip away pretense. He lived as though society's rules were a game, and he had simply decided not to play. In doing so, he revealed something powerful. When you no longer need validation, you become unshakable. People may laugh at you, but their laughter loses its power when you don't depend on their approval. People may reject you, but rejection means nothing if you are not desperate to belong. This is the heart of the Cynic philosophy that Diogenes founded. Virtue and freedom are found not in gaining, but in discarding. How do we apply this to our modern lives? We may not want to live in a barrel or throw away all our possessions, but the spirit of Diogenes is as relevant today as ever. We live in an age of constant comparison and relentless approval seeking. Social media makes it nearly impossible to escape the trap. Every post, every photo, every comment becomes a test. Do people like me? Do I belong? Am I good enough? The problem is not the platforms themselves, but the addiction to validation they create. To live like Diogenes is to break this addiction, to reclaim your independence from the opinions of strangers. It means daring to speak the truth even when it is unpopular, to live according to your values rather than what gains approval, and to find satisfaction in yourself rather than applause. A practical way to begin is by practicing what we might call radical honesty. Try going a whole day without filtering yourself to please others. This doesn't mean being cruel or reckless, but it does mean refusing to pretend. If you don't agree with something, admit it. If you don't enjoy an activity, stop saying yes just to fit in. If you're tired of curating a false version of yourself online, post nothing at all. Radical honesty cuts through the fog of approval seeking and forces you to confront what you actually think and feel. It can be uncomfortable, because it may reveal how often you bend to please others. But it is liberating, because it slowly frees you from the constant performance. Another exercise is to schedule what could be called a day of deliberate disregard. Choose one day to do something without caring at all what others will think. It could be wearing something unfashionable, refusing to check your phone, or speaking your mind on an issue where you usually stay silent. The point is not to shock or offend for the sake of it, but to taste what it feels like to live outside the cage of other people's opinions. Even a small act of disregard builds the muscle of authenticity. You realize that the world doesn't collapse when you stop begging for approval. In fact, you feel stronger because you have proven to yourself that you can survive without constant validation. A digital detox is another powerful step. Social media, for all its usefulness, is designed to keep you hooked on attention. It trains your brain to crave the tiny rewards of likes and shares. Taking a break, even just for a weekend, can feel uncomfortable at first, but it quickly reveals how dependent we are on external signals. When you log off, you're left alone with your own thoughts. At first, this may feel empty, but soon it can feel refreshing. You begin to notice that life is not measured by how many people acknowledge it online. Life becomes quieter, slower, and more your own. That space is where authenticity grows. Diogenes would likely laugh at our modern anxieties. He would mock the way we measure worth by followers, the way we perform happiness for the camera, the way we fear silence as though it were death. He would remind us that we need very little to live well: food, shelter, honesty, courage. Everything else is decoration, and if it enslaves us, it is not worth having. His disdain was not bitterness, but freedom. By mocking society, he freed himself from its grip. His laughter at Alexander was the laughter of a man who needed nothing, not even the approval of a king. To embrace Diogenes' lesson is to step into a kind of fearless living. When you need less, you fear less. When you stop chasing approval, you stop being controlled. When you live authentically, you walk lighter because you carry no masks. This is not an easy path because it may mean losing some of the comfort that comes from fitting in, but it is the path of freedom, and once you have tasted it, you realize how heavy the chains of approval once were. The invitation then is simple. Stop begging to be liked. Stop editing yourself to fit the crowd. Stop living for validation. Choose honesty over performance, authenticity over approval. Even if people mock you, reject you, or misunderstand you, you will be freer than they are. And in that freedom lies the strength that Diogenes discovered, the strength to lie in the sun, laugh at the world, and say to kings and commoners alike, "Stand out of my light." A ronin was a samurai without a master. In feudal Japan, the identity of a samurai was tied completely to service. A warrior's honor came from loyalty to his lord, his clan, and his role in a tightly woven social order. To be without a master meant to be cut off from that identity, drifting without protection, status, or purpose. Ronin were often looked down upon as dishonored men, wanderers who no longer belonged anywhere. Yet in that very displacement was a strange kind of freedom. A samurai tied to his master lived by duty, his life bound to the commands of another. A ronin, however, had no such ties. He walked without belonging, answering only to himself. The term carried stigma in its time, but today it resonates with anyone who feels they cannot or will not conform to the roles society assigns them. To be ronin is to be untethered, which can be terrifying, but it also offers the rare chance to live authentically without disguise. The most famous ronin in history was Miyamoto Musashi. Born in the late 16th century, Musashi was a master swordsman who fought more than 60 duels, undefeated in them all. He lived as a wanderer, never serving one master for long. In a time when most samurai sought security and allegiance, Musashi rejected the safety of attachment. He slept outdoors, traveled constantly, and refined his skills not in the courts of lords but on the open road. His victories made him legendary, but it was his philosophy that endured far beyond his battles. In his final years, Musashi wrote Dokodo, which means the path of walking alone. This was a set of 21 principles that reflected his life as a ronin, detached from possessions, free from desire, unshaken by praise or criticism. Musashi's path was not about rebellion for its own sake. It was about discipline, clarity, and independence. His life showed that to walk alone is not to be lost, but to forge your own way. The paradox of the ronin's life is worth pausing on. To live without a master meant danger. A samurai under a lord had protection, income, and belonging. A ronin had none of these things. He could be attacked, scorned, or left to starve. In many ways he lived precariously, never sure of where his next opportunity would come from. Yet this same lack of security was also his greatest source of freedom. With no master to obey, the ronin was answerable only to himself. His decisions were not dictated by the politics of a clan or the orders of a superior. His path might be uncertain, but it was his own. This is the essence of freedom, the ability to choose your own way, even if it comes with risk. Safety and belonging can offer comfort, but they often demand submission. Freedom, on the other hand, demands courage. Musashi embodied this paradox with clarity. In Dokudo, he wrote about the necessity of detachment. Do not seek pleasure for its own sake. Do not hold on to possessions you no longer need. Do not fear death. These principles reflected a life where nothing external could be relied upon. If you are attached to wealth, to comfort, to the approval of others, then you are vulnerable to losing them. The ronin's way was to cut away these attachments, to build strength that came only from within. In this way, Musashi's path was not just about the sword, it was about mastering the self. To walk alone, he taught, is to live in such a way that nothing can enslave you, not desire, not fear, not obligation. When we bring this idea into modern life, the parallel is striking. Today we may not serve literal masters, but we are often bound by invisible ones. Careers can act like lords, demanding loyalty at the cost of our health and time. Relationships can become cages when built on dependence rather than love. Ideologies, whether political, cultural, or religious, can become masters when we follow them blindly without thinking for ourselves. To live like a ronin is not necessarily to abandon these things, but to refuse blind conformity to them. It is to enter into them with awareness and choice rather than submission. If a job demands that you sacrifice your soul for a paycheck, the ronin spirit reminds you that no paycheck is worth slavery. If a relationship asks you to abandon your values, the ronin spirit whispers that solitude is preferable to false connection. If an ideology pressures you to repeat its slogans without thought, the ronin spirit pushes you to stand apart and ask your own questions. This is not an easy path. It is always easier to obey than to think for yourself, to conform rather than risk rejection, to cling to safety instead of embracing uncertainty. That is why Musashi's example is so important. His life shows that walking alone is not about recklessness, it is about discipline. The ronin who lacked inner discipline would quickly fall into despair or chaos. But the ronin who cultivated self-control, clarity, and strength could thrive even without belonging. This is the challenge of being your own master. No one else will guide you, so you must guide yourself. Building this kind of inner discipline requires practice. In the absence of external authority, you must create your own structure. This might mean setting daily rituals that keep you steady, waking early, journaling, meditating, or exercising, not because someone else told you to, but because you have chosen to master yourself. It might mean refusing easy comforts, deliberately practicing discomfort, so that you are never dependent on luxury. Musashi often emphasized simplicity, living lightly, carrying little, needing little, because simplicity keeps you sharp. In a world filled with distraction, the discipline of simplicity becomes even more important. When you no longer rely on others to give your life order, you discover the strength of your own will. Walking the path of the ronin today also means embracing uncertainty. Musashi did not know where his path would take him, and neither do we. But the lesson is that uncertainty is not the enemy. When you are bound by a master, Whether a job, a relationship, or an ideology, your future may seem secure, but that security can vanish at any moment. The ronin accepts that life is unpredictable and chooses to meet it with readiness rather than fear. This mindset frees you from the constant anxiety of clinging to what cannot be controlled. Instead of worrying about losing, you focus on preparing yourself to adapt, to endure, and to continue walking no matter what changes. Another crucial part of this discipline is learning to be comfortable in solitude. The ronin often traveled alone, slept alone, fought alone. Modern life offers constant escape from solitude, but to follow the ronin's way is to deliberately seek it. Time spent alone becomes a forge for the self, sharpening clarity and courage. Musashi spent much of his life wandering in nature, using solitude not as isolation, but as training. In the same way, we can use solitude as a time for reflection, self-mastery, and creativity. To walk alone is to realize that your worth does not depend on the presence or approval of others. The way of the ronin is not about glorifying isolation, but about realizing that true belonging begins with belonging to yourself. When you are your own master, you can still choose to serve, to love, to connect. But you do so freely, not because you fear the alternative. You are not chained by obligation or dependence. You choose your path, and that choice is what makes it authentic. The challenge then is simple but profound. Build the inner discipline to be your own master. This does not happen overnight. It begins with small acts of independence, making decisions without asking for constant reassurance, spending time alone without distraction, questioning the beliefs you have inherited. It grows as you prove to yourself again and again that you can stand without leaning. Discipline is forged not in grand gestures, but in daily practice. Each choice to walk your own path, however small, strengthens your ability to stand free. Musashi's life and teachings remind us that freedom without discipline is chaos, but discipline without freedom is slavery. The ronin's path is the balance between the two, walking alone with danger on every side, but with freedom in your heart. It is a path of courage, simplicity, and mastery of the self. To follow it today is not to abandon the world, but to engage with it on your own terms. The question is not whether you will walk alone, for at some point in life you inevitably will. The question is whether you will walk alone in fear, or whether you will walk alone in freedom as your own master. Friedrich Nietzsche is one of those rare thinkers who forces us to look at life without illusions. He stripped away the comforting lies that people tell themselves and instead demanded that we face the rawness of existence with courage. At the heart of his philosophy is the idea of the Übermensch, often translated as the overman or beyond man. This figure represents the one who rises above the herd, who stops living according to borrowed values, and becomes the author of his own life. The Übermensch is not about physical strength or superiority over others. It is about becoming one's own lawgiver. Most people live by rules they never question. What society tells them is right, what religion prescribes, what culture celebrates. Nietzsche challenges us to imagine what it would mean to reject all of that and to decide for ourselves from the ground up what values are worth living by. To do this requires immense courage, because it means standing apart from the safety of the crowd. One of Nietzsche's most powerful observations is that the individual has always had to struggle to keep from being overwhelmed by the tribe. This is as true today as it was in his time. The tribe promises comfort. When you belong, you are protected, you are reassured, you are not alone. But belonging also comes at a cost. The tribe demands that you think like everyone else, act like everyone else, and accept its rules without question. If you deviate, you risk rejection. This is why Nietzsche insists that the path to greatness always involves breaking free from the herd. It is a struggle, not a gift. The herd is always pulling you back, whispering that safety is better than freedom. To resist that pull requires constant effort because our instincts push us toward acceptance. Nietzsche's reminder is that the herd may give you comfort, but it will never allow you to become who you truly are. Solitude, in Nietzsche's view, is not just a condition of life, it is a furnace in which individuality is forged. He often describes solitude as a place of incubation, where ideas that cannot survive in the noise of the crowd can finally take root. Great art, great philosophy, great insight, these are not born in the marketplace of opinions, but in the silence of solitude. Nietzsche himself lived this truth. Much of his writing was done in isolation, in small mountain towns or while wandering through the Alps. He was often lonely, sick, and misunderstood, yet it was in these very conditions that his most powerful thoughts emerged. He knew that to create something truly original, you must first separate yourself from the noise of common opinion. When you walk alone, your mind is forced inward, and it is there, in the quiet, that creativity awakens. But Nietzsche also understood the cost of this path. Solitude is not romantic or easy, it is painful. To stand apart from the herd means to face misunderstanding, ridicule, even hatred. Most people fear what they cannot categorize, and those who live by their own values often appear threatening to the comfortable illusions of society. Nietzsche himself was criticized, ignored, and dismissed in his lifetime. He endured illness and isolation, often feeling the weight of being misunderstood. Yet he never surrendered his path. His endurance reminds us that standing apart is not a momentary act, but a lifelong commitment. It demands resilience, the ability to endure loneliness without collapsing back into a conformity, simply for relief. The courage to stand apart means accepting that you may walk through long stretches of life without applause, without recognition, sometimes even without companionship. But it is in this very endurance that authenticity is born. Applying Nietzsche's lesson to modern life means rethinking the way we handle the pressure of conformity. Today, the herd is louder than ever. Social media amplifies its voice, constantly telling us what to think, what to like, what to hate. Trends shift by the hour, and the pressure to keep up can feel suffocating. At work, we are often told to follow rules we don't believe in or chase goals that don't inspire us. In personal life, we may feel pushed toward relationships, lifestyles, or beliefs simply because they are popular. To stand apart in this context means learning to live with discomfort. It means refusing to bend to every new trend, resisting the urge to fit in at the cost of your integrity, and daring to walk a slower, lonelier path if it is the path of authenticity. The danger, of course, is collapsing under the weight of solitude. This is why Nietzsche emphasized not just separation, but strength. To stand apart, you must cultivate an inner life robust enough to sustain you when external approval disappears. This is where practices like journaling become powerful tools. Writing forces you to clarify your thoughts, to define your values, and to see yourself more clearly. Nietzsche's challenge can be turned into a direct exercise. Sit down with pen and paper and ask yourself, what values do I choose if I stop following the herd? This question strips away the easy answers. If you can no longer rely on tradition, on what your peers believe, on what society rewards, what remains? What do you truly hold as good, meaningful, and worth pursuing? At first, the page may feel empty, but over time, answers emerge, and in those answers, you begin to discover the outlines of your authentic self. Journaling in this way is not about perfection or creating a polished philosophy. It is about practice. Each time you write, you strengthen the muscle of thinking for yourself. You may discover that some of your values align with society's, but now they are chosen, not inherited. You may find that others are radically different, and that difference will feel frightening because it may separate you from those around you. But this is precisely the test Nietzsche describes. To create your own values is to risk being alone, but it is also the only way to become free. The courage to stand apart is not only about ideas, it is about daily life. Imagine being in a group where everyone is agreeing on something you know is false or harmful. Do you nod along for the sake of belonging, or do you risk speaking up? Imagine choosing a career path not because it is respected or lucrative, but because it aligns with your deepest sense of purpose. Imagine refusing to chase a lifestyle simply because it looks impressive on the outside. These are the modern arenas where Nietzsche's lesson is lived. The herd will always offer the easy road, paved with comfort and approval. But the individual who dares to step off that road, to endure the uncertainty of solitude, discovers a deeper freedom. Nietzsche's vision of the Übermensch is not a distant ideal reserved for a chosen few. It is an invitation to each of us. It asks, will you continue to live by values that were handed to you, or will you create your own? Will you remain in the safety of the herd, or will you risk the loneliness of authenticity? The answer is never final. Each day presents new choices, new pressures, new temptations to conform, and each day demands courage to resist them. The path is ongoing, never completed, always requiring vigilance. What Nietzsche offers us is not comfort but challenge. He tells us that the pain of solitude is the price of freedom. He reminds us that every individual who has ever created something of lasting value, every artist, philosopher, or visionary, had to endure the loneliness of standing apart. And he invites us to see solitude not as exile, but as soil from which originality grows. So, if you are willing to take on this challenge, start with a question. Sit with yourself honestly and without distraction and ask, what values do I choose if I stop following the herd? Write down your answers. Test them in your life, see where they lead. The process will not be easy, but it will be real. And in a world drowning in conformity, that reality is the rarest treasure of all. The fear of being alone is one of the deepest and most universal fears that humans carry. It is not just a matter of personality or preference, it is written into our biology. For most of human history, survival depended on belonging to a group. A lone individual on the savannah would have had little chance of defending against predators, finding food, or surviving harsh weather. The tribe provided safety, protection, and resources, and so our brains evolved to crave belonging as much as food or water. Rejection from the group meant danger, even death. That is why even today, when the world is far safer, rejection still feels like a kind of death. Our heart races when we are criticized. Our stomach twists when we feel excluded. The fear is ancient, and it explains why people will go to almost any length to fit in. We chase approval because deep down, our bodies equate approval with survival. This evolutionary truth is precisely why society has found so many ways to exploit our fear of being alone. Consumerism thrives on it. Advertising constantly implies that without the right clothes, the newest phone, or the trendiest lifestyle, you risk being excluded. The message is subtle but powerful. Buy this product and you'll belong. Wear this brand and people will admire you. Live this way and you won't be left behind. Politics, too, exploits our tribal instincts. Leaders know that people crave the safety of an us versus them. Belonging to a political party or ideology gives people a sense of identity, and the fear of standing outside of it can be overwhelming. Social media takes this to an even higher level. Every like, share, or comment functions as a microdose of approval, keeping us hooked on the assurance that we are not alone, that we are seen, that we matter. And yet the paradox is clear. The more we chase approval in these systems, the less authentic we become, and the more dependent we feel. The existentialist philosophers understood this fear and examined it closely. Jean-Paul Sartre described the condition of human freedom as both liberating and terrifying. To be truly free means there is no ultimate script, no divine command, no unquestionable authority dictating our choices. That sounds empowering at first, but it also means that we cannot hide behind excuses. We are responsible for shaping our lives, and that responsibility can feel crushing. Kierkegaard, writing a century before Sartre, called this the dizziness of freedom. When you realize that you alone are responsible for your choices, it can feel like standing on the edge of a cliff, staring into the abyss. The anxiety comes not from the presence of chains, but from their absence. People often cling to groups, ideologies, or authorities because it relieves them of this terrifying freedom. If you follow the herd, then you can blame the herd for your choices. But if you walk alone, the burden falls on you entirely. And this is the central lesson. Solitude forces responsibility. When you step away from the group, when you refuse to hide in the comfort of conformity, you suddenly realize that your life is yours to shape. No one else can be blamed, no one else can decide, no one else can carry the weight. At first, this feels like a curse. Responsibility is heavy. It is much easier to let others tell you how to live, what to value, and who to be. But once you accept this responsibility, you discover its hidden gift. Responsibility is power. When you stop relying on others to carry your life, you gain the ability to direct it yourself. You may stumble, you may make mistakes, but they are your mistakes, and you learn from them. This is the foundation of strength, knowing that your life is in your own hands. Of course, breaking free from the chains of approval is easier said than done. The habits of seeking validation are deeply ingrained. This is why philosophers like the Cynics recommended the practice of voluntary discomfort. The idea is to deliberately put yourself into situations where you risk disapproval or discomfort in order to train yourself to stop fearing them. Diogenes, the most famous Cynic, practiced this in extreme ways, living in poverty and mocking the conventions of society, but we can apply the same principle in smaller, more practical ways. For example, spend a day without your phone or without checking social media. Notice how restless you feel, how strong the pull of approval is. By resisting it, you weaken its grip. Another exercise might be to wear something plain or unfashionable in public just to see how it feels not to chase admiration. You might even practice saying no more often to invitations, requests, or expectations that don't align with your values. Each small act of voluntary discomfort builds resilience against the fear of rejection. The point of these exercises is not to punish yourself, but to rewire your relationship with discomfort. When you learn that rejection, criticism, or disapproval do not destroy you, you gain confidence. You realize that you can stand apart and still survive. In fact, you discover that solitude is not as frightening as it once seemed. It becomes a space where you can hear your own thoughts, make your own choices, and live by your own values. The fear of being alone does not vanish overnight, but with practice, it shrinks. What once felt like chains begins to feel like an opportunity. To walk alone is to step into responsibility. To step into responsibility is to step into power. And while the fear of being alone is natural, it is also a test. Those who run from it will forever remain chained to the tribe, chasing approval and avoiding freedom. But those who face it, who endure its anxiety and learn to live with it, will discover the strength of authenticity. This is the courage that the existentialists point us toward, and it is the courage that anyone can practice today through deliberate, honest steps. Solitude may begin as fear, but if embraced, it becomes the foundation of true freedom. Solitude is often seen as emptiness, as a void to be filled, but for those who dare to embrace it, solitude becomes the richest soil for creativity. When you are alone, the noise of the world quiets and something extraordinary happens. You begin to hear yourself. Ideas that were drowned out by the constant chatter of others suddenly emerge. Questions that had been buried under daily distractions rise to the surface. Solitude is not just the absence of people, it is the presence of your own mind in its purest state. This is why solitude has always been the birthplace of art, philosophy, and self-discovery. The greatest works of thought and creativity rarely emerge from crowded rooms or loud debates. They come from the silence of someone daring to sit alone, to wrestle with their thoughts, and to put them into words or actions that change the world. Consider Marcus Aurelius, Emperor of Rome, commanding legions on the front lines of war. He was the most powerful man of his age, surrounded by generals, advisors, and soldiers. Yet his most enduring legacy was not his empire but his private reflections written in solitude. His book, Meditations, was not intended for the world. It was his personal journal, written late at night or early in the morning while camped near battlefields. In the midst of war and responsibility, Marcus turned inward. He used solitude to remind himself of what was true, what was virtuous, what was worth striving for. Those quiet writings, created in stolen moments of aloneness, outlived the empire he ruled. They remind us that solitude is not about escaping responsibility, it is about creating the space to see clearly even within it. Nietzsche, too, found his most powerful insights not in universities or crowded salons, but in the solitude of the mountains. He spent years wandering through the Alps, often sick and alone, carrying notebooks in which he poured his thoughts. It was there, far from the herd of society, that he conceived some of his most radical ideas. The death of God, the eternal recurrence, the Übermensch. His solitude was not easy. It was filled with pain, misunderstanding, and isolation. Yet it was in that very pain that his philosophy was born. Nietzsche once wrote that one must have chaos within to give birth to a dancing star. That chaos is not found in conformity. It is discovered in solitude, where no one shields you from your own questions. Henry David Thoreau provides another example, choosing solitude not out of exile but out of deliberate experiment. In 1845, he built a small cabin near Walden Pond in Massachusetts and lived there for over 2 years. His purpose was to strip life down to its essentials, to see what remained when all distractions and luxuries were removed. In that solitude, he wrote Walden, a book that still inspires people today to rethink their lives, to simplify, and to live deliberately. Thoreau's solitude was not absolute. He sometimes visited friends in town, but his experiments showed the creative power of stepping away from the noise of society. By walking alone, he created a vision of simplicity and authenticity that continues to shape generations. What all of these examples reveal is a profound paradox. When you walk alone, you create truths that others will eventually follow. The solitary thinker, the outsider, the one who dares to step apart, often becomes the source of wisdom for the very crowd they left behind. Marcus Aurelius wrote only for himself, but his words became guidance for millions. Nietzsche endured loneliness, but his philosophy reshaped modern thought. Thoreau lived in a cabin, seemingly cut off, yet his writings continued to inspire movements toward simplicity and environmental awareness. Solitude seems like separation, but in reality it becomes connection at a deeper level. By walking alone, you may be misunderstood for a time, but eventually, others recognize the value of what you discovered in silence. This creative power of solitude has practical applications for all of us, even if we are not emperors, philosophers, or poets. The challenge of modern life is that it leaves almost no room for silence. We are bombarded with notifications, surrounded by constant chatter, and conditioned to believe that productivity means busyness. Yet creativity requires emptiness. It requires stretches of time where nothing external is demanding your attention. This is why it is so important to build rituals of solitude into your life. It could be something as simple as a daily walk without headphones, letting your mind wander freely. It could be setting aside an hour each morning or evening for journaling, meditation, or creative work without distraction. These rituals do not need to be grand. They need to be consistent. Solitude works slowly, like water shaping stone. Over time, it creates space within you where originality can emerge. Meditation is one of the most powerful practices of solitude. Sitting quietly, focusing on your breath or a simple word, you begin to notice how noisy your own mind can be. At first, the solitude feels restless, uncomfortable, even boring. But as you practice, you discover that beneath the surface lies clarity. Insights rise unexpectedly, creativity blossoms, and your sense of self deepens. Another practice is deliberate creative solitude, setting aside time to write, paint, design, or problem solve without interruptions. In these moments, you enter what many call flow, a state where time disappears and you are fully immersed in creation. Flow is almost impossible in constant company or distraction. It requires solitude. One of the simplest yet most profound exercises is what could be called the philosopher's walk. Choose one day each week to go for a walk alone, without music, without your phone, without conversation. As you walk, carry one question in your mind. It could be something personal. What do I truly want? Or something universal. What does it mean to live well? The point is not to find an immediate answer, but to live with the question in silence. As you walk, your thoughts will shift. Your mind will wander, and gradually insights will emerge. The philosopher's walk is a way of combining solitude with movement, body with mind. It becomes a ritual where you meet yourself more deeply than you can in the noise of daily life. Solitude may seem unproductive in a culture obsessed with speed and results, but it is precisely what makes true productivity possible. Without it, we merely react, repeat, and conform. With it, we create, discover, and transform. The creative power of walking alone is not reserved for geniuses. It is available to anyone willing to make space for silence. The challenge is to overcome the fear of being alone long enough to discover the richness within it. Once you do, solitude becomes not emptiness but fullness, not exile, but home. The lesson is simple yet profound. If you want to create, if you want to discover who you really are, you must learn to walk alone, not forever, not as an escape, but as a practice of authenticity. The paradox is that the more you embrace solitude, the more you will have to offer others. The truths discovered in silence eventually echo across time, guiding those who are still caught in the noise. By walking alone, you may light a path that others will someday follow, and even if they do not, you will have walked your own path, which is the greatest creation of all. Dangerous freedom is the final stage of walking alone. Up to this point, solitude has been shown as a source of strength, clarity, and creativity, but we must also face its cost. To live without following the crowd, without hiding behind the safety of belonging, is to risk rejection. People who walk alone are often mocked, distrusted, even feared. Human beings, by instinct, are suspicious of those who do not conform. The herd feels threatened when someone refuses to obey its rules. Think of the child in school who is bullied simply for being different. or the employee who is criticized for questioning the way things are done. At every stage of life, the world tries to push us back into sameness. To resist is to invite ridicule and misunderstanding. And yet, history shows that every person who ever changed the world endured this cost. To be authentic, to stand by your own truth, is to accept that you will sometimes walk through life alone. The danger of walking alone is not just social, it can be existential. Those who reject the herd may face exile, poverty, or worse. Socrates was sentenced to death for questioning the foundations of Athenian society. Giordano Bruno was burned at the stake for teaching that the universe was infinite. Even in less extreme ways, outsiders are punished. They may lose their careers, their reputations, their friendships. This is why most people never dare to walk alone for long. The price feels too high, safety is seductive, and comfort whispers louder than courage. But if you always choose safety, you lose yourself. You remain imprisoned, never knowing what it would feel like to live honestly. The ultimate cost of walking alone is danger, but the ultimate cost of avoiding it is slavery. Yet what waits on the other side of this danger is something rare and precious: unbreakable authenticity. When you no longer live for approval, when you're not chained by fear of rejection, you finally become free to be yourself. This authenticity is not given, it is earned through the trials of solitude. It cannot be taken away, because it no longer depends on external things. If the world mocks you, you remain steady. If the world ignores you, you continue walking. If the world rejects you, you stand unshaken, because your value no longer rests in the hands of others. This kind of authenticity is stronger than any armor. It is not loud or arrogant. It is quiet, resilient, and unyielding. It is the authenticity of someone who has faced themselves in solitude and emerged whole. Albert Camus captured this spirit when he wrote, "The only way to deal with an unfree world is to become so absolutely free that your very existence is an act of rebellion." This is the essence of dangerous freedom. To live authentically in a world that thrives on conformity is to rebel simply by being yourself. You don't need to shout slogans or wave banners. Your existence, lived in truth, is enough to unsettle the system. Every time you choose your own path, instead of following blindly, you prove that another way is possible. Every time you refuse to surrender your integrity for approval, you strike a blow against the unfreedom of the herd. Dangerous freedom means that you may be hated, but you cannot be controlled. It means that your very life becomes a statement: I will not be owned. The lesson here is both liberating and terrifying. You don't need a tribe, you become your own tribe. Most people spend their lives searching for groups to belong to, labels to wear, ideologies to adopt. They fear standing alone, so they cling to any identity that promises security. But the one who walks alone discovers that the deepest belonging comes not from a group, but from self-possession. When you become your own tribe, you carry within you the values, the strength, and the clarity that others seek outside themselves. You may still connect with others, you may still love and build friendships, but these connections are chosen freely, not born out of desperation to avoid solitude. This shift transforms relationships. Instead of clinging to others for validation, you bring authenticity into every bond. You do not need them to complete you, and because of that, your love is purer, your friendship stronger, your presence freer. But how do we embrace this dangerous freedom in practical terms? How do we endure being disliked, misunderstood, or ignored without collapsing into bitterness? The first step is acceptance. Expect rejection, expect mockery, expect misunderstanding. When you anticipate it, you are not surprised when it comes. You recognize it as part of the price of authenticity. Instead of fearing it, you see it as confirmation that you are walking your own path. If everyone approves of you, it may be a sign that you are simply blending in. Being disliked is not necessarily failure. It is often proof of individuality. The second step is reframing. Instead of seeing rejection as evidence that something is wrong with you, view it as evidence that you are no longer dependent on approval. When someone dislikes you for being authentic, they are really expressing discomfort at their own conformity. Your independence exposes their dependence. This is why outsiders are often mocked. They remind others of the freedom they have not dared to claim. Reframing rejection in this way turns pain into strength. Every disapproving glance becomes a reminder that you are walking a path that is truly your own. The third step is building inner practices that anchor you when external support fades. This could be journaling daily to remind yourself of your values, meditating to cultivate inner stillness, or creating art that expresses your truth. These practices make you less vulnerable to the opinions of others because they keep you grounded in who you are. Without them, the weight of rejection can become overwhelming. With them, rejection becomes noise that cannot drown out your inner voice. This path is not for everyone, and it is not meant to be easy. Dangerous freedom demands courage, endurance, and resilience, but it also offers the one thing that no amount of conformity can give: the peace of living honestly. When you walk alone, you may lose the comfort of the tribe, but you gain yourself. You discover a freedom so complete that it unsettles the world around you. You no longer ask, "Will they accept me?" Instead, you ask, "Am I being true to myself?" And when the answer is yes, the noise of rejection becomes irrelevant. The world will always pressure you to return to the herd. It will tempt you with approval, scare you with threats, and shame you with mockery. But if you hold firm, if you accept the cost and claim the reward, you will embody what Camus described: a life that itself is an act of rebellion. You will prove that it is possible to live authentically, even in an unfree world. That is dangerous freedom. It may leave you alone, but it will never leave you empty. And in the end, it is better to walk alone in truth than to be surrounded in a lie. Picture a man straining under the weight of a massive stone, his muscles tense, his body bent forward, his hands gripping against the rough surface. The mountain before him is steep, endless, and unforgiving. Every time he reaches the summit, the boulder slips from his grasp and rolls back down, undoing his labor in an instant. There is no finish line, no reward, no applause, only the demand to begin again. This is the ancient image of Sisyphus, condemned by the gods to repeat this pointless task for eternity. Yet when we look closely, we see more than myth. We see ourselves. Because isn't this what life often feels like? Waking up each day to carry out the same routines, battling problems that never seem to end, chasing goals that slip away the moment we think we've caught them. Think about the grind of daily life. You work long hours, pay bills, clean, cook, answer emails, deal with stress, and then do it all again tomorrow. Students cram for exams only to face another pile of assignments. Parents care for their children while exhaustion never seems to leave. Many of us spend our lives pushing our own boulders: financial struggles, emotional wounds, social expectations, endless responsibilities. And when you finally feel like you've made progress, life often finds a way to send the boulder rolling right back down. It's easy to feel trapped in a cycle where nothing ever seems to truly change. This is why the myth of Sisyphus speaks so powerfully across centuries. It is not just about an ancient man cursed by the gods. It is about the human condition itself. This leads to a haunting question. If everything we do eventually crumbles into dust, if our victories are only temporary, if even the strongest among us will one day die and be forgotten, then why keep going? What's the point of pushing the boulder if it will never stay at the top? This is not a small question. To ignore it is to sleepwalk through life. To face it is to confront the very heart of what it means to exist. And this is where the French philosopher Albert Camus enters the story. Camus described this conflict between our hunger for meaning and the universe's silence as the absurd. We crave answers, order, clarity. We want our lives to fit into a grand design. Yet the world refuses to provide that. It simply is. Indifferent to our struggles, deaf to our questions. Camus did not see this as a reason to despair, but as a starting point for living honestly. For him, the recognition of the absurd was not the end of life, but the beginning of true freedom. So the question is not, how do we escape the struggle, but how do we learn to embrace it? Sisyphus teaches us that the meaning of life is not found at the top of the mountain, but in the act of pushing itself. To live is to carry the boulder. To endure is to revolt against the emptiness by continuing anyway. This perspective will guide everything that follows. The idea that strength, resilience, and even joy can be found not by eliminating the struggle, but by choosing to face it with open eyes and unbroken will. In Greek mythology, Sisyphus was once a cunning king of Corinth, known less for his bravery and more for his trickery. He was clever to the point of arrogance, a man who believed he could outwit even the gods themselves. His crimes were not just petty lies or deceitful bargains, they were acts of defiance against the very structure of existence. He betrayed the sacred laws of hospitality by murdering travelers and guests, violating one of the most sacred codes of ancient Greece. He tricked Thanatos, the god of death, chaining him up so that no mortal could die. While death was bound, the world fell into chaos, battles with no casualties, wounds that never ended in release, and a cosmic order disrupted. When the gods finally intervened and forced Thanatos' freedom, Sisyphus found yet another way to cheat death, tricking even Hades himself into allowing him to return to the living world under false pretenses. It was only after repeated acts of arrogance and defiance that the gods had enough. Zeus decided that Sisyphus's punishment would not be a fiery pit, nor chains, nor torment at the hands of demons. Instead, it would be something far more cruel and profound, meaningless, repetitive labor. His fate was simple but devastating. Sisyphus was condemned to roll a massive boulder up a steep mountain. The task demanded every ounce of his strength. Step by step, he would strain against the stone, inching toward the summit. Yet the moment he neared the peak, the rock would slip from his grasp, tumbling back down with thunderous force. And Sisyphus would be forced to descend the slope, his effort erased, his work undone, only to begin again. For eternity there was no reward, no completion, no sense of achievement. Just an endless cycle of pushing, failing, and repeating. This was his punishment, chosen precisely because it mirrored the most terrifying possibility of human existence, that our labor, our struggles, our entire lives might amount to nothing. The symbolism is almost impossible to miss. The boulder is the weight of life's endless struggles. Every hardship, every obligation, every challenge that presses against us can be seen in that stone. The mountain represents the journey of existence itself, steep, unrelenting, and indifferent to our efforts. Just as Sisyphus pushes his boulder only to see it roll back down, we rise each morning to face the same responsibilities, the same challenges, the same fears, no matter how many times we've already confronted them. The punishment is terrifying not because it is painful, but because it is pointless. We are not afraid of suffering alone. We are afraid of suffering that has no meaning. This is why the myth of Sisyphus has endured through centuries. Ancient myths often feel distant from us, full of gods, monsters, and battles that belong to another world. But Sisyphus is different. His story does not take place in far-off lands with impossible heroes. It takes place in the quiet repetition of our own lives. Every Monday morning commute, every bill that needs paying, every repetitive task at work, all of it echoes the slow, grinding climb of Sisyphus. The myth resonates because it does not describe an extraordinary fate reserved for one man. It describes the ordinary fate of us all. Think about the person who works tirelessly at a job they dislike just to make enough money to survive, only to spend it all on bills that arrive again next month. The cycle never ends. Earn, spend, repeat. Or consider the student who studies for years, takes exams, passes, and then is faced with more advanced studies, more exams, and then the endless challenges of professional life. The struggle does not stop, it simply changes form. Even in relationships, many find themselves repeating the same arguments, falling into the same patterns, or facing heartbreaks that seem to erase all the effort they put in. The boulder rolls down and they must push again. Even our personal growth feels Sisyphean at times. You make progress on your fitness journey only to fall off track and start over. You heal from a wound in your past only for another hardship to come. You build discipline only to feel it slip away during times of weakness. Every time we think we have reached the top, life has a way of knocking us back down. Just like Sisyphus, we are forced to climb again, knowing that the summit will never truly be conquered. What makes the myth even more unsettling is its inevitability. Sisyphus cannot choose to walk away. He cannot stop pushing the stone, nor can he destroy it. His fate is to endure the endless cycle with no hope of escape, and in many ways that reflects the human condition itself. We cannot choose not to exist. We cannot refuse to live without consequence. We are born, we struggle, we push, and eventually we fall. The question is not whether the boulder will roll down. It always will. The question is what we do with that knowledge. For most, this realization feels like despair. To imagine that all our effort is ultimately erased, that all our victories fade, that even the greatest empires crumble, it can feel paralyzing. And yet here lies the brilliance of Albert Camus. Where others saw only hopelessness in Sisyphus's punishment, Camus saw something radical. He argued that the myth of Sisyphus is not a story of despair, but a story of liberation. If life is truly like the task of pushing the boulder, repetitive, difficult, and without final meaning, then we are free to stop searching for some ultimate reward and instead embrace the struggle itself. This interpretation flips the entire myth on its head. Instead of imagining Sisyphus crushed by his punishment, Camus asks us to imagine him content, even happy. Each climb, though destined to end in failure, becomes his moment of defiance. Each push of the boulder is an act of rebellion against meaninglessness. The gods may have given him a punishment, but they could not strip him of his freedom to choose how he would respond. And that, according to Camus, is where real strength is born. By retelling this myth in such a way, Camus turns what seems like the bleakest possible story into one of the most empowering. We do not escape the boulder, but we can embrace it. We do not overcome the mountain, but we can climb it with pride. The myth endures because it mirrors our own lives. But Camus teaches us that what we do with that mirror is up to us. We can see despair, or we can see the opportunity to live fully, even without guarantees. And this is where the conversation turns, from punishment to freedom, from despair to revolt, from meaningless struggle to the possibility of joy within the struggle itself. The absurd is one of Albert Camus' most powerful and unsettling ideas. At its core, it describes the clash between two forces that live within every human life: our desperate hunger for meaning and the universe's complete silence in response. On one side, there is us, human beings who wake up each day asking why we are here, what our lives are for, and what our suffering means. On the other side, there is the universe, vast, unresponsive, indifferent. We cry out for answers, but none come back. We look for patterns, but all we find is chaos. That collision, that tension between our yearning and the emptiness we encounter is what Camus called the absurd. It is not the universe alone that is absurd, nor humanity alone. It is the meeting of the two. We want life to make sense, but it does not. This realization is often shocking. We grow up being told stories that imply life has a clear purpose, religious doctrines that promise salvation, cultural myths that suggest success will bring fulfillment, personal fantasies that imagine happiness waiting just around the corner if only we achieve enough. But at some point, often in adulthood or during a crisis, people realize that no such guarantee exists. The universe does not hand us meaning. No matter how much progress we make, no matter how many prayers we offer, no matter how many goals we achieve, the same unsettling fact returns. There is no pre-written script guiding our lives. We may crave certainty, but the world offers none. It simply exists, indifferent to our struggles. For many, this moment feels like having the ground pulled from beneath them. It is like suddenly waking up to realize you've been climbing a ladder that leads nowhere. Faced with this terrifying truth, most people look for a way to escape it. Camus recognized two common forms of escape that appear throughout history. The first is nihilism, the belief that because life has no ultimate purpose, nothing matters at all. This perspective often leads to despair, apathy, and even destruction. If nothing matters, why work, why love, why live? The second escape is blind faith, turning to religious or ideological systems that promise ultimate meaning beyond this world. While these beliefs can comfort people, Camus argued that they often function as a way of avoiding the confrontation with the absurd. They give answers where none exist, and in doing so, they allow us to avoid facing the raw, unfiltered reality of our condition. Camus refused both options. For him, nihilism was a dead end, because it destroyed life rather than affirmed it. Blind faith was also an escape, because it demanded surrender to illusions rather than honesty. Instead, Camus proposed something more radical. We must face the absurd directly, without flinching, without running, without pretending. This meant accepting the fact that life has no guaranteed purpose, and yet continuing to live fully, passionately, and courageously anyway. This is what he called revolt. Not a revolt against the universe itself, but against the temptation to flee into lies or despair. To understand this better, consider how the absurd shows up in our daily lives. Imagine sitting at work day after day, staring at spreadsheets or emails, and suddenly wondering why any of it matters. The bills will keep coming, the tasks will keep piling up, and in the end, you will die. And someone else will sit in your chair doing the same. That sharp, uncomfortable thought is a glimpse of the absurd. Or imagine scrolling endlessly through social media looking for distraction, validation, or entertainment. Hours pass, but nothing really changes. You are entertained perhaps, but a nagging emptiness remains, as if none of it adds up to anything real. Again, that is the absurd showing itself. We chase recognition, likes, or approval, but the moment we get them, the satisfaction fades, and we're left hungry again. It is the human cry for meaning colliding with the silence of the digital void. Relationships can also reveal the absurd. Two people love each other deeply, but even love cannot protect them from misunderstandings, struggles, or the finality of death. Parents sacrifice for their children, yet children grow, move on, and face their own struggles. Every effort to create permanence is eventually undone by time. This does not mean love is meaningless, but it does mean that love cannot provide the ultimate answer we might want it to. Once again, our desire for lasting certainty collides with the reality of impermanence. Most of us, when confronted with this, instinctively run from it. We bury ourselves in distractions, television, scrolling through feeds, consuming endless entertainment, or overloading our schedules so we don't have time to think. Others chase external validation, career achievements, fame, wealth, or approval from others, hoping that one of these will finally fill the void. But the absurd has a way of returning. Even the wealthiest, most successful people eventually face the same question. What was it all for? The applause fades, the money loses its shine, and the question remains unanswered. Camus challenges us to stop running. He asks us, what if instead of trying to escape the absurd, we looked it in the eye? What if we accepted that life has no built-in meaning, and yet decided to live with passion and courage anyway? What if we stopped demanding that the universe give us purpose, and instead embraced the freedom to create our own? This is the heart of Camus' radical philosophy. By refusing to escape, we reclaim our freedom. We no longer live for some distant promise or fall into despair because meaning is absent. Instead, we find meaning in the very act of living, in our choices, our actions, our struggles, and our defiance. It is important to understand that this is not easy. Facing the absurd is uncomfortable, even terrifying. It means admitting that no external force will come to save us. It means we cannot rely on the fantasy that someday, somehow, everything will finally make sense. But in this very discomfort lies a profound liberation. If life has no pre-written purpose, then we are free to shape it ourselves. If there is no cosmic script, then we are no longer bound to play a role we did not choose. The weight of the absurd is also the weight of freedom. Imagine living without the burden of trying to prove yourself to the universe, to God, to society, or to history. Imagine being free to live fully in the present moment, knowing that this moment is enough. That is what facing the absurd offers. It does not erase the struggle, it redefines it. The question is no longer why go on, but how will I go on? Will I live in despair, or will I embrace the struggle and live authentically? Camus believed that this confrontation with the absurd is the starting point of real strength. To live honestly in a world without guarantees requires courage. To find joy in the face of futility requires defiance. To continue climbing the mountain, even when the boulder will always roll back down, requires a kind of heroism that no external reward can give. Sisyphus, condemned to eternal labor, becomes the perfect symbol of this attitude. He knows the task is pointless in the cosmic sense, yet he continues. And in that continuation lies his dignity, his freedom, and even his happiness. So the key question becomes, what if we stopped running from the absurd? What if, instead of numbing ourselves with distractions or chasing validation, we simply accepted that life is difficult, uncertain, and ultimately without fixed meaning, and then lived with strength anyway? What if we pushed our own boulders, not because we expect a final victory, but because the act of pushing is itself a victory? This question does not lead to despair, but to possibility. It opens the door to a life lived more fully, more freely, and more authentically than any escape could ever provide. Revolt, in the philosophy of Albert Camus, does not mean what it usually does in the political sense. It is not an uprising with banners and weapons. It is not the overthrow of rulers or the destruction of governments. Camus used the word revolt to describe something deeper and far more personal, the stance we take toward existence itself. When faced with the absurd, the realization that life has no pre-written meaning, No divine guarantee, no final purpose. Camus said that the only authentic response is to revolt. This revolt is not about defeating the absurd because that is impossible. It is not about escaping it because every escape is dishonest. Instead, it is about continuing to live fully, passionately, and courageously in full awareness of life's lack of ultimate meaning. It is the act of saying, yes, life is hard, yes, it is absurd, and yet I choose to live anyway. This refusal to give in is the heart of Camus' philosophy. To revolt is to deny despair its victory. When you revolt, you do not sink into nihilism, nor do you cling to illusions of a hidden plan or promised afterlife. You look the truth in the eye and decide to keep walking. You keep pushing your boulder up the mountain even though it will roll down again. You accept that the struggle will not end, but you make the struggle itself your source of strength. This is not an easy path. It demands courage, honesty, and endurance. But for Camus, it was the only path that led to genuine freedom. In a way, revolt is like breathing fire into an otherwise cold and indifferent world. It is the human spirit declaring, you may strip away meaning, but you cannot strip away my ability to live, to love, to act, and to create. Revolt turns existence from a passive experience into an act of defiance. It transforms every step, every action, every effort into a kind of rebellion against nothingness. Camus is not calling for resignation, he is calling for intensity. He is saying that even though life is without ultimate purpose, we can still live with passion, creativity, and joy. The power is not in escaping the absurd, but in confronting it daily and refusing to let it crush us. To understand revolt more clearly, it helps to contrast it with resignation. Resignation is when we give up, when we allow despair to dictate our choices. It is the voice that says, "Why bother?" and then walks away. Resignation is when we stop fighting, stop loving, stop striving because we have convinced ourselves that it is all pointless. Revolt, on the other hand, is the opposite. It is the voice that says, "It may be pointless, but I will do it anyway. I will live, even if there is no reason to live." That choice, that stubbornness, is what makes revolt so radical. It takes the lack of meaning and flips it into freedom. If nothing is written, then everything is possible. Camus' idea of revolt has interesting parallels with Stoicism. The Stoics, like Epictetus and Marcus Aurelius, taught that we must focus only on what we can control and accept everything else with equanimity. If pain, hardship, or death come our way, we must not resist them in vain but learn to endure them with dignity. Camus agreed with the Stoics in spirit, but his emphasis was slightly different. Where the Stoics taught mastery of the self in harmony with nature, Camus taught defiance in the face of a silent universe. For Marcus Aurelius, wisdom was accepting that everything happens according to a natural order. For Camus, wisdom was admitting there may be no order at all and still choosing to live with strength. Both philosophies meet in their demand for courage, but they diverge in their reasons for it. You can think of Stoicism as teaching, focus on what you control. You cannot stop the storm, but you can control your reaction. Camus, on the other hand, teaches, keep living, despite it all. You cannot change the absurd, but you can live defiantly within it. Both approaches give us tools for resilience, but Camus' revolt adds an extra layer of fire. It is not just about self-control, it is about rebellious joy in the face of futility. Where Stoicism is calm and disciplined, Camus' revolt is passionate and rebellious. Both, however, lead to strength. So how does revolt apply to our daily lives? Consider the boulders we each carry. For some, the boulder might be a job that feels endless and unrewarding. For others, it might be the burden of loneliness, grief, or financial pressure. For many, it might be the constant cycle of anxiety and doubt that never seems to leave. These are the places where the absurd reveals itself most clearly. The instinct is often to avoid the boulder, to distract ourselves, to escape into entertainment, to numb the pain with temporary pleasures. But Camus' Revolt calls us to do the opposite. Instead of avoiding the weight, we choose to face it. We push the boulder, not because it will ever stay at the top, but because the pushing itself becomes our act of defiance. Here is a practical way to start. Take out a piece of paper and list the areas in your life where the boulder feels heaviest. Be honest. Maybe it is your work. Maybe it is a broken relationship. Maybe it is your own mind full of doubts and fears. Write them down. Then, instead of asking how you can get rid of these struggles, ask how you can face them with defiance. How can you continue despite them? How can you push the boulder, knowing it may roll back down, but finding strength in the act itself? This shift in perspective can turn despair into resilience. It changes the question from why me to what now? Take, for example, someone dealing with constant rejection. Every attempt to succeed ends in failure. Every effort seems wasted. The natural reaction is to give up. But Revolt says, try again. Not because you believe the universe will eventually reward you, but because the act of trying itself is a form of freedom. Or consider someone battling depression. The weight feels unbearable, the mountain impossible. Revolt says, get out of bed even if it feels meaningless. Live even if you do not yet see the point. Each act, however small, becomes an act of rebellion against despair. This is what makes Revolt so human and so powerful. It does not promise a happy ending. It does not guarantee that your struggles will vanish. Instead, it gives you a way to live honestly and fiercely in the face of struggle. To revolt is to claim your life back from meaninglessness. It is to declare that even if the universe does not care, you do. Even if existence is indifferent, you will not be indifferent. You will live, and in doing so, you will create your own dignity, your own value, your own joy. In the end, revolt is less about victory and more about persistence. It is not about reaching the top of the mountain, but about continuing to climb it. Camus asks us to imagine Sisyphus not as broken, but as defiant. Each step up the mountain, each push of the stone is his rebellion. The gods condemned him to labor, but they could not condemn him to despair. That choice belongs to him. And in the same way, no matter how heavy your boulder, no matter how steep your mountain, the choice of whether to surrender or to revolt belongs to you. When you embrace revolt, you stop waiting for life to hand you meaning and begin to create meaning through your actions. You stop hoping for the struggle to end and start finding strength within the struggle itself. You stop running from the absurd and start living alongside it. And that, according to Camus, is where true freedom lies. The boulder may never stay at the top, but the act of pushing, day after day, step after step, becomes your declaration of life. Camus' most famous and provocative statement comes at the end of his essay, The Myth of Sisyphus. One must imagine Sisyphus happy. At first, this sounds absurd in itself. How could a man condemned to push a rock up a mountain for all eternity possibly be happy? His task is endless, his progress erased at every turn, his efforts doomed to repeat without purpose or finish line. Happiness seems impossible under such a fate. But Camus was not joking. He was not mocking suffering or making light of despair. Instead, he was pointing us toward a deeper truth, that happiness is not dependent on outcomes, on rewards, or on the illusion of final success. Happiness, for Camus, can be found in the very act of living, even in struggle, even in futility. The key lies in how we choose to interpret our struggle. If we see the boulder as an enemy, as a curse, then every step up the mountain is misery. Each failure, Each time the stone rolls down is a reminder of our defeat. But if we learn to see the boulder differently, everything changes. The boulder becomes proof of life. It is the weight that reminds us we are here, we are moving, we are alive. To push the stone is to participate in existence itself. Without the boulder, there is no struggle. Without the struggle, there is no experience. The mountain may be endless, but it gives us something to climb. The boulder may be heavy, but it gives us something to push against. In this way, the very thing that seems like punishment becomes a source of vitality. Camus teaches that the act of pushing itself creates meaning. The outcome does not matter. Whether the boulder stays at the top or rolls down again is irrelevant. What matters is the experience of pushing, the engagement with life, the defiance in each step. This is a radical shift in perspective because most of us are taught to believe that meaning lies in results. We are told that we must reach the summit, win the prize, achieve the goal, and only then will we be fulfilled. But Camus reminds us that the summit never lasts. Every victory fades. Every achievement becomes the beginning of another climb. Every moment of success rolls back down the mountain in time. If happiness depends on outcomes, it will always be fleeting. But if happiness can be found in the process, then it can exist right now, in the midst of the climb. Think about the difference between chasing final success and finding joy in the process. When we chase success, we live in the future. We tell ourselves, I will be happy when I graduate, when I get the promotion, when I make enough money, when I find the perfect partner. Happiness becomes a distant destination, always out of reach. As soon as we reach one goal, another appears. The boulder rolls back down, and we feel empty again. But when we learn to love the process, happiness is no longer postponed. It exists in the act of learning, growing, striving, and pushing. We stop waiting for the future to give us joy and begin finding joy in the present effort. Modern life gives us countless examples of this principle. Consider fitness. Someone who only exercises to achieve the perfect body will almost always be frustrated. The process is slow, progress is inconsistent, and the perfect body may never come. But someone who learns to enjoy the act of training itself, the sweat, the discipline, the small victories along the way, can find joy every day. The exercise itself becomes the reward. The climb is no longer torture but a source of life. Or think about art. An artist who paints only for fame or recognition will struggle endlessly with disappointment. Most works will not be celebrated, and even when success comes, it quickly fades. But the artist who loves the act of painting, the brush against the canvas, the mixing of colors, the flow of creation, finds fulfillment whether or not anyone else notices. The boulder of endless creation does not crush them, it gives them purpose. Even in something like making YouTube videos, the same truth applies. If the creator obsesses only over views, subscribers, or viral success, they will constantly feel unsatisfied. Numbers rise and fall, trends come and go, and the boulder always rolls back down. But if the creator learns to enjoy the process, the research, the writing, the recording, the editing, then each step becomes rewarding, regardless of external results. The act of creating itself becomes the source of meaning, not the outcome. The same principle holds for learning. If a student studies only to get good grades or a degree, the effort can feel exhausting and hollow. But if they learn to love the act of discovery, the excitement of new knowledge, the sharpening of their mind, then each moment of study becomes meaningful in itself. The mountain of education is long, but the climb can be joyful if the focus shifts from the outcome to the process. This is the essence of Camus' statement. To imagine Sisyphus happy is to understand that happiness is not something delivered at the top of the mountain. It is something created with each push of the stone. It is not something reserved for the end of the journey, but something that can be found in the journey itself. The act of pushing, of living, of striving, becomes its own form of fulfillment. Of course, this is easier said than done. Most of us are conditioned to chase results. We look at our struggles and think, if only I get through this, then I'll be happy. But Camus challenges us to flip the perspective. What if the struggle itself is where happiness hides? What if the climb, the resistance, the act of effort is where we become most alive? To practice this shift, one useful exercise is journaling. Set aside a few minutes and write down the areas in your life where you might find joy in the act itself, not just the result. Ask yourself, where do I enjoy the process, even when the outcome is uncertain? Maybe you love the feeling of running, even if you never win a race. Maybe you love the act of writing, even if no one reads your work. Maybe you love cooking, even if the meal is simple and unnoticed. Maybe you love conversations with friends, even if they don't lead anywhere profound. Write them down, reflect on them. These are your moments of Sisyphus's happiness. The times when the boulder is heavy, but the act of pushing fills you with life. The point is not to deny that outcomes matter. Results can be rewarding and achievements can inspire pride. But they are not the foundation of happiness. They are temporary peaks, moments before the stone rolls back down. The deeper, more enduring source of joy is found in the climb itself. This is the radical freedom Camus offered. By shifting our focus from distant victories to present effort, from outcomes to process, we free ourselves from the endless cycle of disappointment. We begin to live in the now, to savor the struggle, to push the boulder with a smile. In the end, Camus' vision of happiness is not about escaping struggle, but about embracing it. The mountain will always be there, the boulder will always roll down, but this does not have to be a curse. It can be a gift, the very thing that keeps us alive, moving, striving, and growing. To imagine Sisyphus happy is to imagine ourselves happy, not because life is easy or final success is guaranteed, but because we have learned to love the act of living itself. Happiness, then, is not at the top of the mountain. It is in every step we take, every push we make, every moment we live. True freedom, according to Camus, does not arrive when life suddenly gives us answers, nor when the struggle finally ends, but when we stop demanding that existence provide us with meaning. This is the paradox that so many people miss. The very thing we believe will enslave us, the endless weight of the boulder, the ceaseless climb up the mountain, becomes the condition for our liberation once we stop fighting against it. Most of us live with the hope that one day, everything will finally make sense. We believe that after we achieve enough, after we find the right person, after we get the dream job, or after we discover some hidden truth, life will finally reveal its purpose. But Camus urges us to drop that expectation altogether. Life may never explain itself. The mountain may never end. The boulder will always roll back down. And yet, instead of despairing over this reality, we can discover a strange kind of freedom within it. When you stop demanding that life give you meaning, you are free to give it your own. This shift is subtle but life-changing. Imagine someone constantly wrestling with the question, why am I here? They spend years chasing religion, philosophy, or external achievements, trying to fill that void. But the moment they accept that perhaps there is no pre-written answer, something astonishing happens. The weight of expectation disappears. They no longer need to conform to a grand plan. They no longer need to prove themselves worthy of some external approval. They no longer live under the shadow of should. Instead, they are free to live authentically, moment by moment, shaping their own meaning through their choices. The chains of needing life to justify itself are broken. That is freedom. Camus' Sisyphus is the embodiment of this paradox. To an outsider, his punishment seems unbearable. He is trapped in futility, condemned to repeat the same task forever. But Camus insists that if Sisyphus accepts his fate fully, if he no longer resists the reality of his condition, then he is no longer crushed by it. He is liberated. The gods may have given him the stone, but they cannot dictate how he feels about it. They cannot prevent him from smiling as he walks down the mountain, ready to push again. In his acceptance, Sisyphus becomes greater than his punishment. He turns inevitability into defiance. He transforms meaninglessness into freedom. We can see echoes of this in the lives of people around us. Consider the artist who creates despite knowing that fame may never come. They paint, write, or compose not because the world promises to recognize them, but because the act of creation itself is enough. Their art is their boulder, heavy and demanding, but chosen willingly. They accept that obscurity may be their fate, yet this acceptance liberates them. They are free to create authentically, without bending to trends or external approval. Their freedom lies in knowing that meaning is not in recognition, but in the act of creating itself. Or think about athletes who train endlessly, often in obscurity for years on end. They wake before dawn, push their bodies to exhaustion, and repeat drills that most people would find mind-numbingly repetitive. They know the competition will be fierce, and victory is never guaranteed. Yet they keep training. Why? Because they have accepted the reality of the climb. The repetition is not punishment, but liberation. By embracing the endless nature of their struggle, they free themselves from the illusion that only victory matters. For them, the training itself becomes life-giving. The climb itself is their freedom. We also see this in individuals who endure illness or hardship with grace. For many, disease or disability can feel like the heaviest boulder of all. The temptation is to curse fate, to resist the reality of suffering, to ask endlessly, "Why me?" But some reach a place of acceptance. They stop demanding that life be fair or painless, and instead focus on living fully within the conditions they are given. This acceptance is not surrender, but a new form of power. By no longer resisting what cannot be changed, they conserve their energy for what they can do: love, create, connect, endure. In that acceptance lies a dignity and freedom that even illness cannot take away. This is why Camus' vision is so radical. He does not offer us the false comfort of escape. He does not say that life will suddenly reveal its secret, or that the struggle will magically vanish. Instead, he gives us something stronger: the knowledge that freedom is already available to us, here and now, if we accept life on its own terms. Freedom is not at the top of the mountain. It is in the way we walk as we climb. For practical reflection, consider this exercise. Take a piece of paper and write down something in your life that you keep resisting. It might be a responsibility you hate, a loss you can't let go of, a weakness you wish you didn't have, or a challenge that feels unfair. Write it clearly. Then pause and reframe it as your chosen boulder. Instead of seeing it as a punishment, see it as part of your mountain, the climb you are meant to make. Ask yourself, how can I push this with strength rather than waste my energy resisting it? How can I embrace this as part of my life rather than endlessly wishing it were gone? The act of reframing does not erase the pain, but it transforms the relationship. Suddenly, you are not a victim being crushed. You are a climber pushing your stone with dignity. Acceptance is not passivity. It does not mean we stop working for change or improvement. It means we stop wasting energy on illusions. We stop demanding that life be easy, fair, or meaningful in some cosmic sense. Instead, we face reality as it is, and in doing so, we become free to live authentically. We stop running from our boulders and start pushing them with open eyes and a steady heart. In this freedom, we are no longer controlled by fear of failure, disappointment, or meaninglessness. We may not control the mountain, but we control how we climb it. This freedom through acceptance may be the hardest lesson of all, because it requires us to give up the comforting lies we have been told. But it is also the most empowering. To accept life as it is, without demanding it be different, is to find a freedom deeper than any external success could provide. It is the freedom of authenticity, the freedom of living without illusion, the freedom of walking down the mountain with a smile, ready to push again. When we look at Sisyphus only from the outside, it's tempting to see him purely as a victim. He is trapped, condemned by the gods, denied any final reward. His fate is endless labor that leads nowhere. But Camus flips this image upside down and insists that Sisyphus is not only free, but a model for how we should live. To imagine Sisyphus happy is to see him not as broken, but as transcendent. He has turned punishment into defiance, futility into freedom. By embracing his struggle rather than resisting it, he rises above the very gods who sought to humiliate him. In this way, Sisyphus becomes not just a figure of despair, but a role model for us all. He shows us that even in the harshest conditions, we can live with dignity, courage, and joy. To live like Sisyphus is to stop waiting for life to become easy. Too often we postpone our living. We say, "I'll enjoy myself when I finally get the promotion," or "I'll find peace when my problems go away," or "I'll start living authentically once I feel safe." But the truth is that the boulder will never disappear. There will always be challenges, responsibilities, and losses. The person who waits for life to become smooth is the person who never truly lives. Sisyphus, in contrast, does not wait. He embraces the stone, knowing it will never stay at the top, and still he climbs. His life is not about reaching a perfect end, but about living fully in the endless push. That is the lesson we can take. Stop waiting for conditions to be perfect, because they never will be. Life is happening now, in the middle of the climb, in the midst of the wait. This leads us to a contrast between safety and what Camus called dangerous freedom. Safety is the life spent avoiding pain, avoiding risk, and avoiding the discomfort of struggle. Many choose this path. They take the job they hate, but that feels secure. They settle for a shallow life rather than risk disappointment. They numb themselves with distractions rather than confront the absurd. Safety may seem comforting, but it is ultimately a kind of slavery. Dangerous freedom, on the other hand, is what Sisyphus embodies. It is the choice to live authentically even when there are no guarantees, to embrace struggle even when there is no final victory. Dangerous freedom is terrifying because it strips away illusions, but it is also the only path to true aliveness. When you live like Sisyphus, you trade the illusion of safety for the reality of freedom. You walk the mountain not because it leads somewhere final, but because walking it is your act of rebellion, your declaration that you are alive. This is what makes Sisyphus heroic. The heroic life is not about results. It is not about final victories or lasting achievements. It is about relentless effort, about courage in the face of the impossible. Sisyphus knows he will never reach the summit, and yet he climbs anyway. His heroism lies not in conquering the mountain, but in refusing to surrender to despair. Likewise, the truly heroic life is not lived by those who win in the traditional sense, but by those who keep going no matter what. The person who continues to create even when no one applauds, the person who continues to love even after heartbreak, the person who continues to endure even under suffering. These are our modern heroes. Their victory is not in outcomes, but in persistence. If we want to live like Sisyphus, we need a roadmap, a way to apply his lesson to our own lives. The first step is simple. Stop waiting for life to be easy. Let go of the illusion that one day the mountain will disappear. Instead of postponing your living, embrace the climb as it is. See each challenge not as an interruption, but as the essence of life itself. The second step is to choose a boulder worth pushing. Not all struggles are equal, and not all are chosen wisely. Some people push boulders that don't belong to them. They live someone else's life, chase someone else's dream, or carry stones handed down by society's expectations. To live authentically, you must choose your own stone. What is worth your effort? What struggle gives your life direction, even if it never leads to a final victory? Choose that and embrace it fully. The third step is to find joy in the process. Do not wait until the boulder reaches the summit to feel proud or alive. That moment will never last. Instead, discover fulfillment in each push, each step, each breath along the way. Just as the artist finds joy in creating, not just in recognition, and the athlete finds joy in training, not just in trophies, you must learn to savor the act of pushing itself. That is where happiness hides, in the process, not in the result. Finally, the fourth step is to accept the absurd and live fully. Do not run from the silence of the universe. Do not demand answers that may never come. Instead, face reality as it is, and in doing so, embrace your freedom. Once you stop insisting that life owes you meaning, you are free to create meaning through your living. This roadmap may sound difficult, but it is also empowering. When you stop demanding that life be different, you no longer live in resentment. When you choose your own boulder, you live authentically. When you find joy in the climb, you live presently. When you accept the absurd, you live freely. Each step transforms your relationship with struggle, turning it from punishment into power. Philosophers across history have echoed this lesson in their own ways. Nietzsche urged us to embrace amor fati, the love of fate, to not only accept our struggles, but to cherish them as essential to who we are. He said, "My formula for greatness in a human being is amor fati, that one wants nothing to be different, not forward, not backward, not in all eternity." To live like Sisyphus is to live amor fati, to embrace your mountain as your destiny and to push your stone with love, not hatred. Viktor Frankl, who endured the horrors of the concentration camps, taught something similar. He wrote, "When we are no longer able to change a situation, we are challenged to change ourselves." Even in suffering, we can choose our attitude. Frankl showed that freedom lies in how we respond to struggle, not in whether we escape it. And Camus himself gave us the ultimate declaration. The struggle itself toward the heights is enough to fill a man's heart. Together, these voices remind us that transcendence is not found in escape, but in endurance. It is not found in illusions, but in defiance. It is not found at the top of the mountain, but in the act of climbing it with open eyes and an unbroken will. To live like Sisyphus is to live courageously, freely, and authentically in a world that offers no guarantees. It is to stop waiting, stop running, and start embracing the weight as your proof of life. It is to smile as the boulder rolls down, knowing that tomorrow you will push again, and that in pushing, you are already victorious. Life is the boulder. No matter who we are, no matter what path we take, we cannot escape struggle. Responsibilities pile up, losses strike, and challenges return just when we thought we had overcome them. The mountain does not disappear. The stone always waits for us at the bottom. To live is to push again and again, step by step, knowing that the summit is never final. This is not a flaw in life. It is life itself. The question then is not whether we will struggle, that much is certain. The real question is how we will face it. We can choose despair, to see our effort as meaningless, to give up, to let the weight crush us. Or we can choose defiance. We can decide, like Sisyphus, that even if the boulder always rolls back down, the act of pushing it is enough. We can meet the absurd with courage, refusing to let it break us. This is the choice each of us makes every day, to surrender or to stand tall in defiance. And there is a kind of pride in choosing to push. Better to lean into the weight of life with determination than to let despair take away your dignity. Better to say, yes, the climb is endless, but I will climb anyway, than to sit at the bottom of the mountain, defeated before you even begin. In that defiance, there is freedom. In that freedom, there is joy. To push with pride is to reclaim your life, not as a finished story with a guaranteed ending, but as a struggle you have chosen to embrace. So let this be the call to action. Imagine Sisyphus happy, and imagine yourself the same. Imagine yourself not crushed by your burdens, but strengthened by them. Imagine yourself not waiting for life to be easy, but finding meaning in the effort itself. Imagine yourself smiling as you walk back down the mountain, ready to push again, knowing that the climb is your victory. And let us end with the words of Camus himself, the man who gave us this radical vision of freedom. The struggle itself toward the heights is enough to fill a man's heart. One must imagine Sisyphus happy. Why do you care so much about what others think? It's a question that feels simple on the surface, yet if you stop and really look, you'll notice how deeply it shapes almost every decision you make. From the clothes you wear to the career you choose, from the things you post online to the way you speak in a group of friends, so much of life is filtered through an invisible lens of expectation. We fear rejection, we dread judgment, we crave belonging and applause. But what if the very thing you are most afraid of, being disliked, mocked, even hated, wasn't actually a tragedy, but the first step toward genuine freedom? What if the cost of living authentically has always been the willingness to disappoint others? This question is not new. Across history, some of the boldest thinkers and most radical outsiders wrestled with it and came to the same conclusion. Freedom does not come from winning approval, it comes from letting it go. The cynics of ancient Greece, led by figures like Diogenes, made it their mission to live in defiance of society's standards. They wore poverty like armor, mocked kings to their faces, and refused to play along with the game of status and reputation. To them, every approval seeker was a slave, shackled not by chains but by opinions. And centuries later, the existentialist philosophers of the modern age, Sartre, Kierkegaard, Camus, picked up the same theme in their own way. They looked at a world without clear meaning or divine authority and said, "You are free, whether you like it or not." And with that freedom comes a terrifying choice. Either live honestly, even if you are hated for it, or hide behind the crowd's approval and never truly exist at all. To live without approval is not just a philosophical idea, it is a dangerous act. It means giving up the safety of conformity, the comfort of being liked, and the reassurance of blending in. It means facing the possibility of standing alone, of being misunderstood, of paying a price for your independence. But within that danger lies something precious: authenticity. The chance to wake up each day knowing you are not playing a role, not bowing to the crowd, not betraying yourself for the applause of others. It is a difficult path, but it is the only one that leads to real freedom. This journey, away from approval and toward authenticity, is what we'll be exploring. The raw defiance of the cynics, the heavy responsibility described by the existentialists, and the timeless struggle between living for others and living for yourself. Each of these thinkers faced the same human trap you face today, the pull to belong at the cost of being real. And each of them left behind insights, warnings, and stories that remind us if you want to be free, you must be willing to be disliked. That is the dangerous freedom we're about to step into. From the very beginning of human history, approval has been tied to survival. Thousands of years ago, being accepted by your tribe wasn't just a matter of pride, it was the difference between life and death. To be cast out from the group meant losing protection, food, shelter, and the shared safety that came with numbers. In that environment, rejection wasn't just emotionally painful, it was fatal. Our ancestors learned that to avoid rejection, they needed to adapt, to conform, to mirror the behaviors that would keep them in good standing. Over countless generations, this need for approval carved itself into our psychology. Even today, in a world where exile no longer means being eaten by wild animals, our nervous system reacts to social rejection as though our very survival is at stake. A harsh word, a dismissive look, or a cold shoulder can ignite the same alarm bells as physical danger. That ancient fear has never left us. It's why public speaking is so terrifying for so many people. It's not the speaking itself, but the thought of standing in front of the tribe and risking their judgment. It's why, even as adults, people can feel the sting of disapproval from parents or peers long after they've left home. Our biology has wired us to equate disapproval with danger, even when our rational mind knows we are safe. This wiring explains why so many of our daily choices, what we wear, how we speak, what we share, are not made freely, but under the invisible pressure of imagined eyes watching us. The problem is that in the modern world, this ancient survival instinct has been hijacked by systems that profit from our insecurity. Social media thrives on the dopamine rush of approval and the fear of rejection. Every like, every comment, every follower count is a tiny measure of acceptance. And because those numbers are visible to everyone, they become a scoreboard of social value. People begin to live for the next notification, as though their worth rises and falls with each click. But beneath this lies a hidden prison. If your self-esteem is tied to likes, then you are never free. You are shackled to the unpredictable whims of strangers. You create not what you believe in, but what you think will be approved of. Your life becomes a performance, rehearsed and polished, but no longer real. It isn't just social media. The approval trap weaves itself into nearly every structure of modern life. In the workplace, careers are often shaped less by passion and more by the hierarchy of status and recognition. People accept jobs they hate, work overtime for bosses they resent, and sacrifice health and family for titles that signal approval. Success becomes less about inner fulfillment and more about external validation. What looks good on a resume, what earns applause in a meeting, what impresses colleagues at a networking event. The individual is lost while the mass grows stronger. Family too becomes a powerful arena for the approval trap. From childhood, we are rewarded for being good and punished for stepping outside the lines. Those early experiences leave deep marks. Many adults live not for themselves, but in an unending quest to please parents or to live up to inherited expectations. It might be the pressure to pursue a respectable career, to marry at a certain age, or to maintain traditions that no longer hold meaning. And even when parents are long gone, the voices linger inside, whispering disapproval at every independent step. This creates an inner cage, the fear that by living honestly you will disappoint the people whose approval you've been trained to chase. All of this creates what can be called the approval prison. It is invisible, but powerful. You may feel like you are making choices freely, but if you examine them closely, you'll often find they are not your own. You may think you are choosing a career, but in reality, you're choosing the one that earns the right nods from family and society. You may think you are posting a photo because you like it, but really you are tailoring it for likes. You may think you are in control, but the truth is, your self-worth is being outsourced to others, dependent on their applause. And as long as that is true, you are not free. The philosopher Soren Kierkegaard once wrote, "The crowd is untruth." What he meant was that the mass opinion of society often hides reality rather than reveals it. When you base your life on what the crowd thinks, you are living in untruth. You are shaped by illusions, not by your own essence. The crowd praises conformity, but conformity kills individuality. The crowd rewards safety, but safety often smothers growth. Kierkegaard's warning is clear. If you let the crowd define you, you will never meet yourself. You will spend your life as a shadow of what others expect, never as the person you truly are. Think about the difference between chasing likes and living truthfully. Imagine two writers. The first writes only what she knows will trend online, carefully sculpting every word for approval. Her work gets applause, but it is hollow. She never risks her soul on the page. The second writes what she truly believes, even if it's unpopular, even if it earns criticism. She may not gather as many fans, but her words carry authenticity, and in them, she feels alive. The first is praised but imprisoned. The second is vulnerable but free. This is the same choice each of us faces in our own lives, whether we are writers or not. The trap of approval feels safe, but it's a cage lined with velvet. It whispers to us that if we keep everyone happy, if we never offend, if we stay within the lines, we will be loved. And sometimes we are. But that love is fragile. It lasts only as long as we keep performing. Step outside the role, and the approval vanishes. Real love, real respect, real selfhood can only emerge when we stop bargaining for applause and start living from within. The crowd will call it dangerous, and perhaps it is. But the greater danger is to waste a life in the comfort of a prison you never dared to leave. Freedom sounds beautiful at first. We all say we want it. Freedom to live how we want, freedom to make our own choices, freedom to escape the expectations of others. But when you stop and really consider what freedom means, you realize it isn't just a gift, it's a heavy weight. True freedom is terrifying because it strips away excuses. If no one else is in control, if no external authority dictates your life, then the responsibility rests entirely on your shoulders. You cannot hide behind tradition or God or society or family. Every choice is yours. Every consequence is yours. And with that realization comes not comfort, but fear. Jean-Paul Sartre, one of the central voices of existentialist philosophy, captured this in his famous line, "Man is condemned to be free." Condemned because freedom is not optional. It's not something you can choose to avoid. Even if you surrender to the crowd, even if you obey blindly, even if you try to bury your individuality under layers of conformity, you are still making a choice. There's no escape from freedom. To be human is to be faced with decisions every day, from the small to the life-changing, and to know that no one else can make them for you. You might hope that a rulebook or tradition will tell you what to do, but in the end, you are still the one who must decide whether or not to follow it. This is why Sartre called it a condemnation. We are thrown into a world without a script and yet forced to act. This realization brings with it an unsettling feeling that Soren Kierkegaard described as the dizziness of freedom. Imagine standing at the edge of a cliff. You feel the fear of falling, but you also feel the strange awareness that you could jump if you wanted to. That open possibility, the terrifying awareness that nothing is stopping you, is the same sensation freedom brings to the human soul. Kierkegaard saw this anxiety not as a flaw, but as a fundamental part of existence. To be alive is to stand before the vast openness of possibility and feel both wonder and dread. And because this anxiety is so uncomfortable, many people try to escape it. They run back into the arms of the crowd, into ready-made answers, into approval. They would rather have others decide for them than face the dizzying responsibility of freedom. Albert Camus took this insight even further when he spoke about the absurd. For Camus, life itself has no clear meaning handed down from the heavens. The universe is silent, indifferent, and yet we hunger for answers. This creates what he called the absurd, the clash between our desire for meaning and the universe's refusal to provide it. Faced with this absurdity, people often turn to illusions. Religions, ideologies, approval from society. These offer comforting scripts, ways to avoid the burden of creating meaning for ourselves. But Camus argued that to live authentically, we must rebel against the absurd. We must reject the ready-made answers, accept the silence of the universe, and still choose to live with passion and integrity. That rebellion is an act of freedom. When you tie together Sartre, Kierkegaard, and Camus, you see a common theme. Freedom is inescapable, freedom is frightening, and freedom is the essence of what it means to be human. But here's where it connects to the trap of approval. Living authentically in your freedom means making choices that others may not understand, or may even reject. It means risking disapproval, misunderstanding, and judgment. If you live only to be approved of, you are never truly free. You're outsourcing your freedom to others. Their expectations become your script, their opinions become your law. But existentialists argue that this is nothing more than bad faith. Sartre described bad faith as the lie we tell ourselves when we pretend we are not free, when we act as though we are victims of circumstance or bound by forces beyond our control. Living for approval is one of the clearest forms of bad faith. It's saying, I can't choose for myself, I must be what others want me to be. To break free from this, you must embrace authenticity instead of validation. Authenticity doesn't mean reckless self-expression or ignoring everyone around you. It means aligning your choices with your true values, even when they conflict with the crowd's expectations. It means recognizing that you cannot avoid freedom, so you might as well own it. It means standing in the dizziness of possibility and saying, I will choose for myself. And it means accepting that with this choice comes risk, the risk of rejection, the risk of loneliness, the risk of failure. But those risks are the price of real existence. Think of how many people stay in careers they despise because of approval. They tell themselves they have no choice, but in truth, they do. They could walk away, but they fear the judgment of family or society. So they bury their freedom under excuses, choosing validation over authenticity. Or consider relationships. How many remain in hollow partnerships, terrified of being single, terrified of disappointing parents, terrified of being judged by peers? Again, they tell themselves they can't, when in reality they are free, but unwilling to bear the burden of freedom. The existentialists would say that such a life is not truly lived. It is merely acted, a performance stage for others. What does authenticity look like then? It looks like choosing to act from your own center, not from the shifting tides of opinion. It looks like writing the book you want to write, even if no one reads it. It looks like pursuing the career that aligns with your values, even if it doesn't impress relatives at family gatherings. It looks like dressing in a way that feels right to you, not to the imaginary critics in your head. Authenticity requires courage, because it often means standing alone. But that solitude is the birthplace of strength. Camus once said, "The only way to deal with an unfree world is to become so absolutely free that your very existence is an act of rebellion. When you stop chasing validation, when you start choosing your life based on truth rather than approval, you become that act of rebellion. You're no longer a puppet dancing for the crowd's applause. You are a human being, standing tall in your own freedom. And yes, people may hate you for it. They may reject you, misunderstand you, or even mock you. But in that moment, you will know a deeper freedom, the freedom of not being owned. The burden of freedom is heavy, but it is also the path to authenticity. Approval offers the illusion of safety, but it robs you of your selfhood. Validation is addictive, but it leaves you hollow. Freedom demands courage, but it gives you back your soul. Kierkegaard, Sartre, and Camus were all telling us the same thing in different ways. You are free, whether you like it or not. Stop hiding from that truth. Stop living for approval. Stand in the dizziness, rebel against the absurd, and choose to live authentically. That is the burden, that is the danger, but it is also the only way to truly exist. Authentic freedom sounds noble in theory, but in practice it comes with a price. The moment you stop living for approval and start living authentically, you will collide with resistance. Not everyone will celebrate your courage. In fact, many will hate you for it. To be free is to break the invisible contract of conformity, and that act threatens the fragile balance that holds groups together. Society depends on people following rules, speaking the same language, and obeying shared customs. When someone dares to step outside of that, it unsettles the group. It forces them to face their own compromises, their own fears, their own hidden desire to break free. And rather than admire the rebel, people often choose the safer route. They condemn, ridicule, and try to drag them back into the fold. This resistance is not random, it is deeply psychological. Humans cling to order because order provides security. When someone challenges that order by refusing to play the game, it feels like a threat, not just to the system, but to the people who have built their lives on following the rules. Nonconformity becomes a mirror. It reflects back the possibility that maybe the rules are not absolute, maybe the sacrifices were unnecessary, maybe the whole structure is more fragile than it seems. And that realization is uncomfortable. So instead of questioning themselves, people turn their discomfort outward and direct hostility toward the one who dared to be different. History gives us countless examples of this pattern. Socrates, one of the founders of Western philosophy, was sentenced to death for corrupting the youth of Athens. His real crime was encouraging people to think for themselves rather than blindly follow tradition. Jesus was rejected, mocked, and ultimately crucified, not because he was cruel or violent, but because he challenged the religious and political order of his time. Friedrich Nietzsche was dismissed as insane and dangerous, even though his writings were decades ahead of his age. And Diogenes, the cynic who lived in a barrel and mocked the powerful, was treated as a madman rather than a teacher. Each of these figures chose authenticity over approval, and each paid a heavy price for it. Yet their ideas lived on, precisely because they were rooted in truth. Nietzsche put it bluntly, the individual has always had to struggle to keep from being overwhelmed by the tribe. This struggle is eternal. The tribe, whether it is a community, a culture, or the faceless crowd of online opinion, demands obedience. It rewards those who conform and punishes those who stand apart. To remain an individual requires a kind of stubborn courage, the willingness to endure ridicule and misunderstanding rather than surrender your soul. Without this courage, the tribe absorbs you. You become just another face in the crowd, another voice echoing the same slogans, another life wasted in imitation. The hostility toward nonconformity has not disappeared in the modern world. It has simply taken new forms. Cancel culture, for example, shows how quickly the crowd can turn on those who step outside accepted narratives. Online shaming allows millions of strangers to attack a person within hours, stripping them of dignity, reputation, or livelihood. Peer pressure still operates in schools and workplaces, pushing people to act against their values for fear of exclusion. Even family expectations can function as a form of soft hostility. Parents or relatives who guilt, shame, or withhold love when someone dares to take a different path. Each of these is a modern expression of the same old truth. Authentic freedom unsettles others, and the response is often rejection. But here's the paradox. To live authentically, you must accept this hostility. You must cultivate the courage to be hated. Without it, you will forever bend under the weight of opinion. Courage here doesn't mean aggression or arrogance. It doesn't mean seeking conflict or trying to shock people for attention. It means standing firm in who you are, even when others disapprove. It means enduring rejection without crumbling, criticism without surrender, misunderstanding without self-betrayal. True courage is quiet but unyielding. It is the inner strength that allows you to walk alone if necessary, rather than betray your own truth for the comfort of being liked. Psychologically, hostility toward the authentic often reveals more about the critic than the target. People who project anger or ridicule onto nonconformists are often dealing with their own insecurities. When someone refuses to play by the rules, it exposes the compromises others have made to fit in. It reminds them of dreams they abandoned, values they silenced, risks they never took. Instead of facing that regret, they lash out. The rebel becomes a scapegoat for their discomfort. Understanding this can help you see criticism differently, not as a reflection of your failure, but as evidence of your freedom. Consider the life of an artist. Many of the most celebrated creators, Van Gogh, Kafka, Emily Dickinson, were ignored, mocked, or misunderstood in their lifetimes. Their work did not fit the mold of what the crowd approved, but they continued anyway, not because they enjoyed rejection, but because they could not betray their vision. Today, their names are remembered, while the voices of their critics are forgotten. This is the long arc of authenticity. In the moment, it provokes hostility, but in time it becomes a beacon for others. In your own life, the stakes may not be as dramatic as Socrates or Van Gogh, but the principle is the same. If you choose authenticity, if you choose the career that fulfills you instead of the one that pleases your family, if you express your beliefs honestly instead of echoing the crowd, if you live in a way that reflects your truth, you will face resistance. People may mock you. They may call you selfish, foolish, or naive. They may withdraw approval or even sever ties. But if you lack the courage to endure this, you will remain trapped in their shadow, never knowing the fullness of your own existence. The application here is simple but difficult. Practice the courage to be disliked. Start small if you need to. Speak an unpopular opinion in a group. Say no to a demand that doesn't align with your values. Post something online that reflects your real thoughts instead of what you think will earn likes. Notice how discomfort rises when approval is withheld, and resist the urge to retreat. Each act builds strength. Each moment of endurance expands your freedom. The goal is not to seek hatred, but to stop fearing it. Authentic freedom will always provoke hostility. That is the cost. But it is also the proof that you are alive, that you are no longer bound by invisible chains. To live in constant approval is to live as a shadow. To live with the courage to be hated is to step into the light of your own being. As Nietzsche warned, the tribe will always try to overwhelm the individual. The question is whether you have the strength to remain standing when the tribe turns against you. If you do, then you will know a freedom that few ever taste, the dangerous, exhilarating freedom of being real. Human beings are social creatures, and to survive in a world filled with rules, expectations, and constant judgment, we learn very early to wear masks. These masks are not literal, of course, but psychological. They are roles we step into, ways of presenting ourselves that make us more acceptable to others. Carl Jung, the Swiss psychologist, called this the persona. The word itself comes from the Latin for mask, the kind an actor would wear on stage. Jung saw the persona as the version of ourselves that we show to society, the carefully managed face designed to gain approval, avoid conflict, and meet expectations. On the surface, the persona seems useful, even necessary. Without it, we might struggle to function in the collective world. But the danger comes when the mask no longer feels like a mask. When we wear it for so long, we begin to forget there was ever a real face beneath it. Think about how this plays out in daily life. A person might step into the mask of the responsible professional at work, speaking in ways that project confidence even when they feel uncertain inside. At home, they might shift into the mask of the perfect partner or the obedient child, suppressing their frustrations to maintain peace. Among friends, they might wear the mask of the funny one, keeping everyone entertained while hiding deeper sadness. These masks are not always malicious. They allow us to navigate complex social worlds. But if we depend on them too heavily, we risk losing touch with our authentic self. We start believing we are the mask, and when that happens, our lives are no longer truly ours. They become performances scripted by the need for approval. The danger of this can be subtle but profound. For example, someone might convince themselves that they enjoy a career path chosen for them by family or society, when in truth they feel suffocated by it. Day after day they put on the mask of competence, the mask of ambition, and smile through meetings while their inner voice grows weaker. Or consider relationships. How many people stay in partnerships not out of love, but out of fear of judgment if they leave? They perform the role of happy partner at dinners and social events, while inside they feel empty or even resentful. In both cases, the persona is at work. The mask of approval conceals the authentic self, and over time, the line between the two blurs. This problem is not new. The Taoist philosopher Zhuangzi, who lived in ancient China, expressed it in his famous story of the butterfly dream. One night he dreamed he was a butterfly, fluttering freely in the air. When he woke up, he wondered, was he Zhuangzi who dreamed he was a butterfly, or a butterfly now dreaming he was Zhuangzi? The story is often interpreted as a meditation on identity, how fragile, fluid, and uncertain it can be. When we live through masks, the same question arises: who are we really? Are we the person we show to others, or the being hidden underneath, rarely seen? When the mask becomes too convincing, it's easy to lose track of the answer. The approval trap makes this problem worse. The more we depend on others for validation, the more masks we must create. Instead of living from the inside out, we live from the outside in, sculpting our persona according to what will be praised, liked, or admired. Over time, our lives can start to feel strangely hollow. We may achieve what others call success, yet feel deeply disconnected from ourselves. This is why so many people reach the top of careers, relationships, or social hierarchies only to find themselves asking, is this all there is? They have mastered the art of the mask but forgotten the reality of the self. One way to begin breaking this cycle is to practice noticing the moments when you act for approval rather than truth. This requires honesty, because the mask is slippery. It often disguises itself as common sense, duty, or politeness. But if you pay attention, you can begin to see the difference. When you agree to something you don't want, is it because you truly value harmony, or because you fear disapproval? When you laugh at a joke that offends you, is it genuine or is it the mask of belonging? When you stay silent in a conversation, is it out of respect or out of fear of being judged? Each of these small moments reveals how much of your life is lived in performance. A practical exercise is to keep a simple journal for 1 week, noting down instances where you notice yourself putting on a mask. Don't judge yourself, just observe. Write down the situation, what you did, and what you actually felt inside. Over time, patterns will emerge. You might notice that with certain people, co-workers, family, friends, you always fall back into the same mask. You may realize that entire areas of your life are structured around persona rather than authenticity. The point of the exercise is not to rip off every mask immediately. That would be overwhelming. The point is to become conscious of them, to start separating the persona from the self. Self-development in this sense is not about becoming someone new, but about removing what is false. It is about peeling away the masks one by one, until what remains is the authentic self that no longer needs approval to exist. This process is slow, and it requires courage. Masks are safe. They protect us from conflict and rejection. To remove them is to risk being seen, and being seen means being vulnerable. But it also means being real. And only the real self can ever find genuine freedom, love, and fulfillment. The journey of removing masks is one of the hardest and most important paths in life. It may mean disappointing people who only loved your persona, not your truth. It may mean changing careers, ending relationships, or redefining yourself in ways that unsettle others. But the alternative is far worse: to live your whole life in costume, applauded by the crowd, yet never truly known, not even by yourself. Jung warned that when the persona becomes too strong, the authentic self slips into the unconscious, and the result is a life of quiet despair. To avoid that fate, you must risk peeling off the mask. If Zhuangzi's dream reminds us of the uncertainty of identity, Jung's concept of the persona reminds us of its danger. We can dream so convincingly that we lose sight of who we are when we wake. The task of philosophy and self-development is to wake up, to ask the uncomfortable questions, and to choose truth over performance. The crowd will always encourage masks, because masks are easy to approve of. But real growth requires honesty, and honesty cannot breathe under a mask. In the end, the courage to live authentically begins with the simple act of noticing. Notice when you are performing. Notice when you are silencing yourself. Notice when your choices are more about approval than truth. Each moment of awareness is like a crack in the mask, a reminder that there is someone underneath worth discovering. With time, the cracks grow wider, the mask weakens, and the self begins to emerge. And when it does, you may find that you don't need as much approval as you once thought. You may find that the freedom of being real, though dangerous, is worth more than the safety of being liked. When we think about rebellion today, we often picture protests, revolutions, or political uprisings. But long before those movements, there was a different kind of rebellion, one that didn't rely on armies, speeches, or banners. It was the rebellion of a single individual who chose to live outside of society's expectations, exposing its absurdities simply by refusing to play along. This was the rebellion of the cynics, and at the heart of it stood one of the most outrageous and uncompromising figures in history, Diogenes of Sinope. Diogenes was not like the philosophers who taught in elegant schools or wrote polished works for posterity. He lived in a barrel, or more accurately, a large clay jar, on the streets of Athens. He owned almost nothing, carried only a cloak and a staff, and relied on scraps of food or the charity of others to survive. To most Athenians, he looked like a beggar, a madman, or a nuisance. But beneath this rough exterior was a radical thinker who rejected the entire framework of social life. While other philosophers debated about abstract theories, Diogenes lived his philosophy in full view of the public. His message was simple: society's rules, customs, and hierarchies are illusions, and to live freely, one must strip them away. The most famous story about Diogenes involves his encounter with Alexander the Great. Alexander, who at the time was the most powerful man in the known world, approached Diogenes while he was sunbathing. With a mixture of curiosity and condescension, Alexander asked if there was anything he could do for the philosopher. Diogenes looked at the ruler of nations and replied, "Yes, stand out of my sunlight." In that single moment, he revealed something profound. Even a man who commanded armies and ruled vast territories had no real power over him. Alexander could take lives, conquer lands, and command obedience, but he could not give Diogenes anything he truly needed. Freedom for Diogenes meant needing nothing from the approval or generosity of others, not even from a king. The philosophy of cynicism was built on this principle of radical independence. Unlike other schools of thought that sought to improve society, the cynics openly mocked it. They refused to play status games, ridiculed luxury, and saw conventions like wealth, reputation, and even elaborate manners as empty distractions. To them, the path to freedom was not found in rising higher within the social order, but in stepping outside of it altogether. The word cynic itself comes from the Greek kynikos, meaning dog-like. They embraced this insult, living shamelessly, free from society's pretenses. Like dogs, they lived according to nature, not according to human opinion. Living according to nature was the cynic ideal. It meant stripping life down to its simplest necessities and rejecting everything artificial. Food, shelter, water, and honest living were enough. Anything beyond that, fine clothes, gold, prestige, was unnecessary baggage. By refusing these, they demonstrated a freedom that society couldn't touch. This was not a freedom handed down by laws or rulers, but a freedom rooted in self-sufficiency. If you need nothing, no one can control you. If your happiness does not depend on approval, wealth, or recognition, then society has no power over your soul. One of Diogenes' most famous acts was wandering through Athens in broad daylight with a lantern. When asked what he was doing, he replied, "I'm looking for an honest man." It was both a joke and a scathing critique. He was mocking the dishonesty and hypocrisy of society, how people wear masks, hide behind appearances, and live for approval rather than truth. His lantern was a symbol exposing how rare authenticity really is. In a city filled with wealth, art, and politics, he suggested that honesty was the rarest treasure of all. What would it mean to live like Diogenes today? Clearly, very few people are going to abandon their homes and live in barrels, but the spirit of cynicism is not about literal imitation. It is about recognizing the chains of convention and daring to live without them. In our world, those chains are everywhere. Consumer culture that tells us our worth depends on what we own, social media that measures value in likes and followers, career paths designed to impress rather than fulfill. To live like Diogenes today would mean cutting through these pretenses. It would mean recognizing that true freedom doesn't come from climbing the ladder, but from stepping off it. Imagine someone who rejects the constant hunger for new gadgets and clothes, who chooses simplicity over endless consumption. That person is practicing cynicism. Imagine someone who refuses to sculpt their life around Instagram likes, who shares only what feels genuine rather than what will be approved. That too is cynicism. Imagine someone who walks away from a high-paying job they hate, despite the disapproval of family or society, in order to pursue something truer to themselves. That is Diogenes' spirit alive in the modern world. Of course, this kind of rebellion comes with discomfort. Diogenes was ridiculed and mocked, just as anyone who defies social expectations today risks criticism. But this is precisely the point. Approval is the currency of conformity. If you want to live authentically, you must be willing to devalue that currency, to let go of the need to be admired. Diogenes' life was an exaggerated performance of this truth. By pushing society's disapproval to its limits, he revealed how meaningless that disapproval really was. In a way, Diogenes' radical life serves as a mirror. He forces us to ask, how much of what we do is real and how much is performance? How much of our identity is shaped by genuine values and how much is just borrowed from the crowd? His lantern is still relevant today. We might laugh at the image of a man searching for honesty in the middle of the day, but if we held up that lantern to our own lives, what would we find? Would we see authenticity or only layers of masks and roles built for approval? The application is not to abandon everything, but to begin peeling away what is unnecessary. It means asking, what do I truly need? What conventions am I following only for the sake of appearances? Where am I enslaved to approval? The cynic rebellion reminds us that much of what we chase is a distraction. Freedom comes not from gaining more, but from needing less. Each time you reject a false value, whether it's the pursuit of likes, the race for status, or the pressure to consume, you reclaim a piece of your freedom. Diogenes may have lived in a barrel, but his real dwelling was independence. His rebellion wasn't against specific rulers or laws, but against the deeper tyranny of opinion and convention. That rebellion is just as relevant now as it was in ancient Athens. In a world drowning in noise, performance, and consumption, the cynic spirit offers a radical reminder. You don't need their approval, you don't need their applause. You are free the moment you stop playing their game. At some point in every person's life, there comes a quiet but decisive moment. It may not happen in a dramatic way. It could be as subtle as a thought before bed, a feeling in your chest during a meeting, or the sense of emptiness after following a path that was never really yours. That moment is the realization that you have a choice to make. Will you continue living for approval, or will you live authentically? This is not a small decision. It is the great life choice, one that separates a life spent in imitation from a life that is genuinely your own. Søren Kierkegaard, the Danish philosopher, described something he called the leap of faith. For him, this leap was about choosing to ground your life in something deeper than the crowd, something more authentic than the shifting winds of opinion. Kierkegaard saw that the crowd always offers ready-made answers, tradition, conformity, the comfort of being like everyone else. But if you follow the crowd, you dissolve into it. To truly exist, you must take a leap into yourself. This leap of faith is not about rejecting other people completely, but about daring to choose your own path, even if it sets you apart. It is the decision to say, I will no longer live as a copy of others, I will choose myself. Albert Camus, in his own way, spoke of a similar rebellion. For Camus, life is absurd. There is no cosmic script handed to us, no divine order that guarantees meaning. Many people, when faced with this, surrender to illusions, systems of belief or approval that give them the illusion of purpose. But Camus believed the honest response to absurdity was rebellion, not rebellion in the sense of destruction or violence, but rebellion as integrity. To live authentically is to stare into the silence of the universe, accept that there is no guarantee of meaning, and still choose to live truthfully, passionately, and without pretense. It is refusing to surrender your life to the crowd's illusions, even when those illusions would make things easier. The cynics expressed this authenticity in their own radical style. They believed in honesty without shame, in simplicity without pretense, in a life lived openly according to nature. Diogenes, for example, shocked Athenians not just with his words but with his way of living, refusing conventions, ignoring status games, and embodying shameless independence. While few of us are called to that extreme, the lesson remains powerful. Authenticity is not about decorating your mask. It is about removing it altogether. It is about living so directly from your truth that approval becomes irrelevant. Living authentically doesn't mean rejecting everyone or cutting yourself off from the world. That would be another kind of prison. What it means is refusing to be enslaved to opinions, whether they are positive or negative. Approval should not be the currency by which you measure your worth. Instead, authenticity asks you to ground your life in your own values. And the first step toward that is learning to distinguish between what is truly yours and what has been borrowed from others. A practical way to begin is through journaling. Set aside time to write down the values that guide your life. At first, you may find yourself listing things that sound good or socially acceptable: success, stability, kindness, achievement. But the deeper question to ask is, where did these values come from? Are they truly yours, or were they handed to you by family, culture, peers, or social media? Write them down in 2 columns: my real values and borrowed values. Be honest. You may find that much of what drives your life has been borrowed. This is not a failure. It is the beginning of clarity. Once you see what isn't truly yours, you can start to let it go. Another powerful practice is learning to say no. Many people live lives filled with obligations that do not reflect their true desires or values, simply because they are afraid to disappoint others. Saying yes becomes the default, and over time, resentment builds. Authentic living requires the courage to decline expectations that don't align with who you are. This doesn't mean being harsh or unkind. It means respecting yourself enough to not give your life away for approval. Every time you say no to what isn't yours, you're saying yes to yourself. Equally important is practicing small risks of honesty. You don't need to overhaul your entire life in one dramatic gesture. Authenticity can be built one step at a time. Try speaking your mind in a conversation where you would normally stay silent. Share an idea or a piece of work that feels personal, even if it might be judged. Dress in a way that feels right to you, even if it's not what others expect. These small acts build strength, and over time they create a life where your choices reflect who you are, not who others want you to be. This process is not always easy. There will be resistance, both from within and from others. Internally, you will feel fear, because approval has been your safety net for so long. Externally, others may criticize or withdraw their support, because your authenticity challenges the roles they expect you to play. But if you stay committed, something remarkable happens. The more you live authentically, the less approval you need. You begin to realize that the world doesn't collapse when you are disliked, that rejection is survivable, and that the reward of authenticity is worth the cost. Authenticity also transforms the quality of your relationships. When you stop living for approval, the people who remain close to you are those who value you for who you truly are. This may mean losing some connections, but what remains will be deeper and more real. Instead of being surrounded by people who love your mask, you will begin to attract those who resonate with your truth. In this way, authenticity is not just about self-liberation, it is about creating a more honest and meaningful life with others. Living authentically is not a one-time choice, but a daily practice. Every day you are presented with moments where you must choose: approval or truth, mask or self, conformity or freedom. Most of the time, the temptation will be to choose approval. It feels easier, safer, more comfortable. but the cost of that comfort is your life. If you choose authenticity, the path will be harder at first, but each step strengthens your freedom. Kierkegaard's leap of faith, Camus' rebel, the cynic's shameless honesty, all point to the same conclusion. Authenticity is not about escaping freedom, it is about owning it fully. In the end, authenticity is not about rejecting everyone else, it's about no longer being enslaved to their opinions. You can still love people, still connect, still participate in society, but you do it from a place of freedom, not from a desperate hunger for validation. You are no longer a performer on the stage of approval, you are the author of your own script. And that shift, though dangerous, is the only way to truly live. Living authentically has always been difficult, but in the modern world the challenge is sharper than ever. In the past, approval was something that came from the immediate circle around you, your family, your neighbors, your village. Today, approval is crowdsourced. Social media has turned identity into a public marketplace, where likes, shares, and comments serve as constant signals of who we are and whether we are acceptable. Culture now functions like a giant mirror, reflecting back to us not who we are, but who we are supposed to be. With every scroll, we see models of success, happiness, or beauty that we are invited to copy. And with every post, we are tempted to craft ourselves as a product, optimized for attention. This constant performance makes it nearly impossible to separate the self from the mask. If you are not careful, you begin to live as a brand rather than a person. You shape your experiences not for their intrinsic worth, but for their shareability. Vacations become photo opportunities, meals become aesthetic content. Even private feelings get filtered into polished captions. In this environment, authenticity becomes radical. To live without the constant hunger for approval is not just unusual, it is revolutionary. That's why reclaiming solitude and self-respect is so crucial today. Solitude gives you a space where no one is watching, where you can breathe without an audience. It allows you to hear your own voice beneath the roar of the crowd. Self-respect grows when you learn to value your own judgment as much as the opinions of others. And the right to be disliked, perhaps the most difficult of all, frees you from the invisible chains of expectation. If you can accept that not everyone will approve, then suddenly their disapproval loses its power. You no longer have to live in fear of rejection because rejection has become survivable. The contrast here is sharp. Approval chasing offers safety, but it is the safety of slavery. When you live for the crowd's applause, you trade away your freedom for comfort. You become predictable, easy to control, shaped by what others demand. Authenticity, on the other hand, feels dangerous. It risks misunderstanding, criticism, even hostility, but that danger is also its strength. It is the danger of being real, of walking without a script, of stepping into the open with nothing but yourself. Approval is a cage dressed as comfort. Authenticity is a storm that feels frightening but opens up the sky. So how do we practice this dangerous freedom in the modern world? One way is to take a digital detox, even if only for short periods. Social media amplifies the approval trap like nothing else, constantly feeding us comparisons and inviting us to measure our worth in numbers. By stepping away, turning off notifications, taking breaks from posting or setting limits, you can reclaim your attention and stop living as a product. You might feel uneasy at first, as if you are missing out, but what you are really doing is detoxing from the drug of approval. Over time, you may find that life without constant feedback is calmer, clearer, and more alive. Another practice is voluntary discomfort, a kind of modern cynic training. Diogenes and the cynics deliberately lived in ways that stripped away luxury and approval. They slept outdoors, wore simple clothes, and endured mockery. You don't need to copy this exactly, but you can adopt the spirit. Try leaving the house without makeup or dressing in a way that feels comfortable but not impressive. Try sitting in silence without reaching for your phone. Try saying no to an unnecessary purchase and seeing what it feels like to resist consumer culture. These small acts of discomfort remind you that you don't need constant approval, luxury, or conformity to survive. They build resilience and remind you of your independence. A third practice is existential journaling. Set aside time to write honestly about your life, but with one guiding question: what do I choose if I stop seeking approval? This question is powerful because it cuts straight to the heart of the problem. It bypasses the mask and the expectations and forces you to face yourself. You may discover that many of your current choices, your career, your habits, your goals, are shaped less by what you value and more by what earns approval. This realization can be uncomfortable, but it can also be liberating. Once you see the chains, you can begin to loosen them. Each entry becomes a rehearsal for freedom, a way of practicing the courage to choose yourself. The beauty of these exercises is that they don't require you to overthrow your entire life in one dramatic moment. They are small but radical shifts, each one pulling you closer to authenticity. Over time, they retrain your mind to stop craving approval and start seeking truth. They teach you that freedom doesn't come from being liked, it comes from being honest, and honesty, once tasted, is difficult to surrender. Dangerous freedom in the modern world means daring to live as more than a brand, more than a product, more than a mask. It means carving out solitude in a noisy culture, choosing integrity over likes, and being willing to disappoint others if it means remaining true to yourself. It is not easy, it is not comfortable, but it is the only way to reclaim your life from the crowd. Albert Camus captured this spirit perfectly when he wrote, "The only way to deal with an unfree world is to become so absolutely free that your very existence is an act of rebellion." In today's approval-driven culture, authenticity itself is rebellion. To live truthfully is to resist the pressure to perform. To choose yourself is to reject the cage of conformity. And to accept the danger of being disliked is to step into the only freedom that is real.